Chapter 222. Damn it! The heavy armored cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland has already broken through the defensive line. Why are these defeated soldiers still so difficult to deal with? Wiping the dust off his face, Sarukagan raised his sword and questioned his subordinates angrily. Just a moment ago, another of his cavalry troops had been defeated. Again, let another 10,000 cavalry get close. Charge! If we don't kill this army today, the Kuruth kingdom will be destroyed. Sarukan roared hysterically as he pointed his scimitar at the flag of the German Empire that was still fluttering in the distance. As he roared, more soldiers of the Kuruth kingdom rushed to the front line, charging at the disrupted and tottering German Empire's defensive line that had yet to be completely broken through. Firing another bolt at the charging Kuruth soldiers, the German Empire's crossbowmen, who were already numb, regained the feeling of shooting at a target. When he saw his brother's troops being pierced through by the terrifying cavalry, he even felt an inexplicable sense of fear. However, the battle that followed once again turned into the familiar scene that he was familiar with. This made his hanging heart fall back to its original place. The battle in front of him was no longer as thrilling as before. Enemies more than 300 meters away could not even take a step forward before they were pierced by the crossbow bolts and stacked there. Now, there was a wall of flesh on the other side, a hill completely piled up with corpses. Behind the wall of corpses was the Kuruth cavalry, and on the other side of the wall was a long slope formed by the fallen soldiers of the Kuruth kingdom. All the Kuruth soldiers were struggling to move forward on top of the corpses. Step by step, they were hit by the crossbow bolts and collapsed on top of the corpses, becoming a quagmire that hindered the advance of their comrades behind them. At least a few thousand soldiers fell along the way, and some were killed by magical explosive shells when they launched the attack. With such heavy losses, only Sarukan's personal guards could continue to fight. Even so, the soldiers of the Kuruth kingdom were unable to shake the front of the German Empire's crossbowmen. They tried to attack from the sides, but they were also beaten back, leaving behind only more corpses. At this point in the battle, the Kuruth army still did not know whether the Kingdom of Northland's heavy cavalry had already slaughtered the German Empire's crossbowmen and crystal cannons. They were waiting for the Kingdom of Northland's cavalry to turn around and attack the stubborn German Empire's crossbowmen. What's going on? If the Kingdom of Northland's cavalry has succeeded, why haven't they returned? Now in despair, Sarukan was unable to convince himself. He could only turn around and ask the general beside him. "My lord, it hasn't been that long. Perhaps, they have already killed their way through the German Empire's crossbowmen and are already attacking the enemy's commander?" The general did not know whether to laugh or cry as he made up an excuse to fool his Khan. He knew that his Khan was in a mess and could no longer judge the situation in front of him. He could only do his best and leave the rest to fate. He could only wait for a miracle to happen, or for a terrible defeat. What's going on? Where are the heavy cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland that rushed into the formation? Why haven't they returned? After a few seconds, Sarukagan couldn't hold it in anymore and questioned the general beside him. The pitiful general could only grit his teeth and continue to console his Khan. "Khan, don't worry. No one can stop the cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland. Don't you think so? There's nothing to worry about. Before this battle, did they think that they could reach the capital of the empire? But what happened? Even their own capital, Larma, had fallen into the hands of the enemy. Sarukan cursed in his heart, but he did not refute his general. He was only worried about the situation in front of him. He was afraid that the cavalry would not turn back. Even if he was faced with a broken formation of the empire, he would not be able to eat this piece of fat meat. In other words, this piece of fat meat that looked delicious was not fat meat to the Kuruth kingdom, but a hot iron plate full of spikes. If he bit down, not only would he lose a few teeth, he might even lose his life. Once again, Sarukan asked a question that he did not get tired of. Why haven't the cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland turned back? Can you send someone to contact them? Quickly send someone to see what's going on. Just as Sarukagan was about to break down, a general ran over and brought him a piece of good news. My lord, the enemy's counterattack has weakened. After losing tens of thousands of men, the Kuruth Kingdom's army had finally exchanged the lives of their own soldiers for most of the crossbows carried by the German Empire soldiers. Now that the enemy no longer had any decent long-range weapons, it was time for the Kuruth Kingdom's soldiers to shine. Attack! Attack! Everyone charge! Hearing the good news, Sarukagan finally calmed down. He laughed and gave the order to attack, even pushing his own reserves to the front lines. "We've run out of crossbows." An officer with a face full of stains stood in front of the Imperial officer and reported, "We can only meet the enemy head-on. Let the enemy get close. We must hold on until the last moment." For the German Empire, the Imperial officer drew his sword and gave the order to continue fighting. Behind him, the flag of the German Empire still fluttered in the wind, as if to prove something. Long live the German Empire! All the soldiers drew their swords and roared in unison. They stared at the approaching soldiers of the Kuruth Kingdom in the distance, their eyes full of disdain. "Prepare for battle." The officers shouted one order after another, and the soldiers were ready. Hearing the dull sound of war drums from the opposite side, they were ready to fight until the last moment. The Kuruth Kingdom will win. In the distance, the Kuruth Kingdom's army, which had invested more soldiers in the attack, roared to boost their morale. They had more people, and their shouts were more majestic. They who had been suppressed all this time seemed to be venting their anger in this way. Chapter 2:23. We can't go on like this. If the enemy's archers come into play, it'll be a disaster for us. An Imperial officer frowned as he looked at the approaching enemy army and muttered uneasily. In fact, everyone knew what would happen if they allowed so many enemies to approach. Not to mention the deadly arrows. Even the Delman Empire's crossbowmen, who only knew simple fighting techniques, were no match for the elite cavalry of the Kuruth Kingdom. As long as they engaged in close combat, the ratio of losses would be reversed. About 7 or 8 German Empire crossbowmen were needed to exchange for 1 Kuruth Kingdom cavalry. In just a few minutes, the entire battlefield would be flooded by the Kuruth Kingdom's army. A moment later, behind the German Empire's main battlefield, the heavy armored cavalry of the Empire ascended the high ground. Behind them was the sound of drums, and their lances were still stained with blood. These heavy armored cavalry were full of energy, high morale, and high fighting spirit. They were well equipped and even brought some magic crystal cannons. Long live the German Empire! These German Empire soldiers stepped over the corpses of the Kingdom of Northland's heavy armored cavalry, killed the wounded of the Kingdom of Northland's cavalry, and finally walked to the defensive line of the main battlefield. "Do you need help?" Riding on his warhorse, the captain of the heavy armored cavalry smiled at the Imperial officer standing under the German Empire's flag. "My troops just happened to pass by, and I see you're in trouble." "Haha." The Imperial officer grinned and looked up at the captain of the heavy armored cavalry. "You came at the right time. Leave the crossbows and magic crystal cannons and leave. We're not tired yet. We can still fight for a whole day." The captain of the heavy armored cavalry nodded. "Marshal Alonso ordered you to retreat and rest. Leave the rest to us." "All right." The Imperial officer smiled and nodded. He had just seen the situation behind him and knew that Alonso's main force would soon approach. This was the main reason why he insisted on not retreating. Now that the battlefield was handed over to the main force, he could finally rest. Fight hard. Let these bastards of the Kuruth Kingdom know what a real battle is. They will know. Believe me, they will know. The captain of the heavy armored cavalry looked at the heavy armored cavalry passing by him and said matter-of-factly, "I guarantee that this battle will be unforgettable for them." When Sarukagan finally reached the top of the pile of corpses, he saw the scene of the Empire's soldiers loosening up. The battlefield that had fallen silent due to the lack of crossbow bolts suddenly became noisy again. The sound of Azrael's cannon rang out once again, echoing in the wilderness. Following that, even more German Empire crossbowmen raised their weapons. Their cannonballs were placed in front of the Kuruth soldiers, and everything seemed to have returned to how it was before. What was even more frightening was that this time, the enemy had heavy cavalry, even more crossbowmen, and even more crossbow bolts. The Kuruth Kingdom's army collapsed without any suspense, with the main force of the Empire joining the battle. The line that even the heavy armored cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland could not break through was overkill against the Kuruth Kingdom's army. In just a few moments, Sarukagin's main force, which the Kuruth Kingdom was proud of and believed to be comparable to the Kingdom of Northland's army, was almost completely wiped out on the battlefield. The remaining troops could only cover their heads and flee. Sarukagin was pulled back, his eyes filled with unwillingness and madness. He felt that he should die in battle here, in this land that made him despair. Unfortunately, his subordinates could not let him die here. After all, Sarukagin was still the Kagin of the Kuruth Kingdom. Retreat. Kagin. The cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland must have retreated. Let's hurry back to the main camp and make plans later. A general supported Sarukagin as he looked at the chaotic army and advised. After all, Sarukagin did not really want to die on a battlefield. He only had the thought of doing so. But with the attack of the German Empire, this thought had long been extinguished along with the troops under his command. Therefore, he did not speak and was pulled back to the main camp by his subordinates. They gathered the defeated soldiers along the way, and in the end, they did not even manage to gather a few thousand men. Who would have thought that an army of tens of thousands would be defeated so easily? However, when Sarukagin finally pulled himself together and led the defeated soldiers back to the main camp, he found that it was no different from a battlefield. Corpses were piled up like mountains, and the camp was in ruins. At a glance, one could tell that a fierce battle had taken place here, and it was a very tragic one. Sarukagin did not even dare to enter the camp, and only sent 2 of his trusted subordinates to inquire about what had happened. In the end, the 2 subordinates returned with news that not long after Sarukagin left with his troops, an organized rebellion broke out. Several generals suddenly rose in revolt and fled with their soldiers. All the warriors who were unwilling to wallow in the mire with them were killed. An army that had set out in such a grandiose manner had not even been able to take down a single city. They had even lost their capital, Lauma, and more than 2/3 of their men. This could be said to be the biggest joke in the history of the Kuruth Kingdom since its establishment. Retreat immediately. Aren't we courting death if we wait here? The crossbowmen of the German Empire on the flanks are about to arrive. If we get caught, we'll lose another few thousand men. After seeing the strength of the Empire's heavy cavalry, Sarukagin knew his current situation. Leading the remaining troops and retreating quickly to preserve the few remaining members of the Kuruth Kingdom was the only thing he could do now. If the remaining people were lost, the Kuruth Kingdom would not even have the right to ask for peace. But even if they wanted to leave, how could they leave so easily? The German Empire's heavy cavalry chased after the Kuruth Kingdom's troops, preventing them from retreating at full speed. As long as they could reduce the speed of the Kuruth Kingdom's retreat, the German Empire's main forces would be able to pursue the Kuruth Kingdom's troops. Retreat immediately. Take all the troops with you, and leave behind those who have suffered heavy losses. Quick, if we don't leave now, it'll be too late. Sarukagin gave this cruel order. Chapter 2:24. The army of the Kuruth Kingdom retreated in full force, leaving behind many old and weak soldiers as bait for the main forces of the German Empire. A few days later, in Larma City, inside the Khan's tent, if we had enough troops to go north, the entire Kuruth Kingdom would be ours. Marshal Alonso looked at the map with some regret. He crossed his arms and sighed. Who would have thought that this battle would go so smoothly? If we take down the Kuruth Kingdom by force, our battle line will be stretched too far. Ammunition will be difficult to resupply, and the Kuruth Kingdom will become a quagmire that traps us, a logistical nightmare. The general of the William family stood beside Marshal Alonso and said, This general of the William family placed great importance on defense and was willing to carefully calculate the logistical support as well as his own forces. He He was a great tactician and was especially good at consolidating a victory that he had already won. Being cautious and prudent was his strategy. His creed for victory was to not give the enemy any opportunities, even if he did not want them. Yes, the meat is already stewed, and we don't have a fork ready. It's really troublesome. Marshal Alonso sighed again, shifting his attention away from the map of the Kurut kingdom that was at his fingertips but extremely troublesome. What do you think we should do with the surrendered soldiers of the Kurut kingdom? After these few battles, it's not a small number now. Marshal Alonso looked at him and asked. Although the battle on the battlefield was exciting and gripping, the German Empire's great victory took place on the entire front line. His troops defeated the counterattacking troops of the Kurut kingdom and captured a large number of their soldiers. The results of the battle were glorious. Not only that, but Alonso's troops also defeated the Northland heavy cavalry that came as reinforcements. This army was led by King Gravel's trusted aide, Anna, but now Anna was seriously injured and captured by Alonso's troops. Send the captives back to the Empire to participate in the construction. After all, the shortage of manpower in the rear is not something new. The general of the William family thought for a moment before replying, but the soldiers who surrendered in Larma City have been well trained, so they can be used directly. The lack of qualified troops was also a serious problem that plagued the German Empire. No matter how fast they expanded their army, after suddenly occupying so much territory, their military strength was once again stretched thin. The army of the German Empire had already gathered tens of thousands of soldiers, and the only cities that needed to be controlled now was Larma, the capital of the Kurut kingdom. Therefore, Alonso really hoped that the surrendered Kurut kingdom troops could be put to use. He hoped that he could disperse these soldiers and give them to the expanded army. This way, it would be the safest way to make use of these surrendered enemy troops. Arrange for these troops to be sent to Blackstone Fort as much as possible. Marshal Alonso said after weighing the pros and cons. What's left is to guard against the counterattack of the Kingdom of Northland. The general of the William family said to Marshal Alonso, I'm very clear on this problem. Khan Seru still escaped with his remaining troops, probably going to the north to ask for reinforcements from the Kingdom of Northland. My father, the Lord of Blackstone Fort, General Tyrone, has been defeated by King Gravel's men, and his current situation is unknown. Those northern barbarians actually still have our airships, and not just one, but 4. However, I've heard that the female general who led the Northland heavy cavalry is also an important person in the Kingdom of Northland. We must ensure that she's more useful alive than dead. For now, I'll leave the defense of Larma City to you. You have the right to act first and report later. I have to lead the army back to Blackstone Fort as soon as possible. Blackstone Fort is currently too empty. I can't expose such an important place to Gravel. After Marshal Alonso was done with his arrangements, he went to make preparations first. The next morning, the army of the Kingdom of Northland brought a large number of troops back to Blackstone Fort. After a few days of continuous travel, Alonso finally arrived back at Blackstone Fort before King Gravel went south. On the other hand, Khan Seru brought his remaining troops north to find King Gravel, who had just defeated Tyrone's Blackstone Fort expedition. He told King Gravel about the situation here, and also mentioned that Anna might have been captured or killed in battle. Gravel was very excited when he heard this. The newly formed Northland Heavy Cavalry was the elite of the Kingdom of Northland. He didn't expect that they would be wiped out, and Anna's fate was unknown. Thus, after arranging for Bethman to lead his men to chase after Tyrone's army, King Gravel personally led the Kingdom of Northland's main army south to attack Blackstone Fort. King Gravel stared coldly at the towering Blackstone Fort. Was this the so-called main fortress of the Kingdom of Northland? It was useless. Even Rayleigh, which was defended by Tyrone's Blackstone Fort expedition, was still taken by him. It would be difficult to stop the Kingdom of Northland's army here. King Gravel didn't care about the people of the Kingdom of Northland, but he wanted to see if Marshal Alonso would come personally to defend Blackstone Fort. He had been defeated by him a long time ago, and now he had defeated the Northland Heavy Cavalry, captured Anna, defeated Seru's army of tens of thousands and occupied the capital of the Kurut kingdom, Larma. Would Marshal Alonso be a match for him now? King Gravel raised his head proudly. In his opinion, this Alonso wasn't as powerful as he thought. Did he really think that he could stop the kingdom of Northland's army with just a sturdy city? He snorted coldly and turned to the silent Seru. Is this the Alonso you fear so much? I think he's just a guy who only knows how to use magic crystal cannons. Seru stiffened his neck and said, You'll know once you fight. Oof, I will. You'll soon see how the soldiers of the kingdom of Northland attack the city walls. King Gravel turned his horse around and rode back to the camp. From the afternoon until late at night, the soldiers in the Northland camp were busy assembling all kinds of siege weapons. Catapults were beginning to take shape, and huge siege wagons were erected in the middle of the camp. Thousands of soldiers were chanting as they slowly lifted a 10-foot-long battering ram with iron chains and installed it on a wooden frame. Airships carrying large incendiary bombs arrived at the center of the camp and began to unload them. These incendiary bombs were invented by Kevin of the Demon Hunter's Blade. In the night, King Gravel stared at the dark city walls. His handsome face revealed a sinister smile as he muttered to himself, Alonso, once I defeat you, I'll be able to pierce the heart of the kingdom of Northland. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Chapter 225. On the city walls. The Derman's army was also busy moving war supplies to the north of the city. In addition to the magic crystal cannons, 10,000 giant crossbows with flammable materials tied to them were also ready and placed in large metal boxes. 100 giant crossbows were also set up. Tens of thousands of Derman's soldiers were seizing the time to sleep, for a fierce battle of life and death would begin tomorrow. In the northeast corner of the north wall, Alonso stood in front of the battlements and stared at the brightly lit Northland barracks. He could faintly see countless figures moving about in the barracks, and there were also huge black shadows standing in the sky above the barracks, like monsters looking at the city in the dark. The Northland army had concentrated 100,000 troops on the north of the city and had given up on attacking the other gates. It was obvious that they were concentrating their forces on attacking the city. This was a Northland commander who would launch a thunderous attack as soon as the battle began. He was also very smart, knowing that the Kuruth had attacked the north of the city before, and that the north's defenses were not as strong as the other walls. At the same time, he did not besiege the south of the city, which also had a gate, and gave the Derman's army a path of retreat in order to eliminate the determination of the Derman's army to resist. As long as the Derman's army retreated, the Derman's army would be pursued and defeated in a disadvantageous situation where their numbers were far inferior to the enemy's. This was also a Northland commander who knew the art of war. Alonso analyzed his opponent little by little. He could already feel the impatience of his opponent, a man who loved to achieve great things, a commander who did not understand strategy and did not know what consequences his failure would bring to the kingdom of Northland. Just knowing that Alonso was in the city, he could not wait to launch a large-scale attack. Gradually, a disdainful smile appeared on Alonso's lips. Since his opponent was so eager, he might as well use the necessary weakness to boost his popularity and let him be blinded by victory. Thinking of this, Alonso turned back and ordered in a deep voice, "Pass down my orders. Withdraw the magic crystal cannons. Withdraw half of the heavy catapults and giant crossbows, and leave only the lowest level of defense on the city walls." At dawn, the sky turned white, and the first glimmer of light appeared on the horizon. At this moment, the Derman scouts spotted the enemy, and there was movement in the Northland barracks. Nearly 100 heavy catapults began to slowly leave the barracks and move closer to the city walls. At the same time, the drums of the Northland army sounded and rumbled like thunder in the early morning. This was the kingdom of Northland's strategy of attacking a city. They would use the heavy catapults to open the path and deal a devastating blow to the defending army before launching a large-scale attack. During this period, They would also use heavy battering rams to smash the city gates. These nearly 100 heavy catapults were the first step of the Northland army. They moved slowly, and the boulders they threw could reach up to 800 paces. It required 200 people to move them. The catapults moved slowly, and King Gravel was in the middle of the army, looking at the city walls with cold arrogance. He wanted to use the huge firebombs to burn the city walls to the ground. At this moment, there was a strange sound from the city walls, and then a black dot appeared in the sky. The sharp sound was getting closer and closer, and hundreds of iron arrows whistled through the air. Some flew over the heads of the soldiers, while others hit the catapults. The catapults at the front were hit by the iron arrows, and the catapults fell apart. Even King Gravel was almost hit by a large arrow. An iron arrow whizzed past his scalp, and his warhorse was frightened. It raised its front hooves high and let out a long cry of fear. More than 10 guards were so scared that they hurriedly helped him off the horse. King Gravel quickly returned to the barracks. No. King Gravel shook off the guards and stared at the black dots in the sky. They were the boulders thrown by the Derman's army. With a loud bang, the boulders hit the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. There was another loud bang, followed by a series of screams. A few catapults were smashed into pieces by the Derman's boulders, and hundreds of people were killed or injured. There aren't many of them. Don't be afraid. King Gravel roared. Return fire. Dozens of soldiers from the kingdom of Northland with torches in their hands ran forward and lit the cotton balls that were wrapped around the wooden balls. The cotton balls were soaked in kerosene and ignited with a loud bang, turning into a huge fireball. The soldiers shouted, and the catapults were fired. Dozens of huge fireballs rose into the air, emitting thick smoke as they flew towards the city walls. Boom! With a loud bang, a fireball hit the top of the city wall. The Derman's army screamed and fell to the ground. A few soldiers from a Derman's army couldn't dodge in time and were hit by the fireballs. They were instantly set ablaze, and a large amount of kerosene seeped out. The fire was ignited by the cotton balls, and the flames spread in all directions. Dozens of Derman's army were set ablaze, and they screamed and ran in all directions. Some even fell off the city walls. With a large number of fireballs hitting the city walls, the northern part of Blackstone Fort was engulfed in a sea of fire. Dozens of catapults and giant crossbows were engulfed by the fire. The most tragic ones were the 2,000 Derman's army. They ran in all directions, and some were engulfed by the fire. Most Derman's army's head and armor were set ablaze, and they wailed and rolled on the ground. At this time, the eastern side of the northern city wall wasn't affected by the fire yet. A few catapults were shooting boulders. The imperial officer was so anxious that his eyes turned red. He stomped his feet and shouted to Alonso, "Marshal, boulders aren't effective. Let's use the magic crystal cannons." Alonso looked at the Derman's army that was screaming and running in the fire. No matter what, now wasn't the time to use the magic crystal cannons. He bit his lips so hard that they almost bled. He shook his head firmly and said, "Don't use the magic crystal cannons. Order the Derman's army to retreat from the northern part of the city." After a while, the eastern side of the northern city wall was also hit by dozens of firebombs. The entire northern part of the city was engulfed in a sea of fire. King Gravel looked at the raging fire on the city wall. He looked at the Derman's army that was screaming and falling off the city walls. He couldn't help but laugh proudly. He immediately ordered the troops to attack the city. We must take down Blackstone Fort before noon. King Gravel, we can't invest so many troops. The Derman's magic crystal cannons haven't been fired yet. We will suffer heavy losses. Saru Khan rushed up and pleaded, "King Gravel, we can only invest a few thousand people to test the strength of the Derman's army." "General Saru Khan, you are old. The war with the Empire has turned your guts into that of a mouse. Can't you see? The Derman's catapults have already been burned to ashes." He laughed proudly again. What was there to fear from the Derman's army? Let's see how he will capture Alonso alive at noon. Fireballs streaked across the sky and flew over the heads of the Northland's army. The fire on the city walls burned fiercely. Following the fierce attacks of the Northland army, the Northland army began their attack. The city walls were filled with densely packed soldiers. They shouted in unison and swept up a murderous aura as they approached Blackstone Fort step by step. Chapter 2:26. The Kingdom of Northland siege chariots were built from large logs. However, in order to attack Blackstone Fort, the siege chariots of the Kingdom of Northland were even wider and taller. They had a wider base and were wrapped tightly in rawhide. There were wooden wheels attached to the base that were slowly pulled forward by horses. There were more than 100 people on top of the siege chariot. They pulled up a large wooden board wrapped in leather as cover to block the enemy's arrows. At the same time, they opened shooting holes in the wooden board and shot arrows at the top of the wall. When the siege wagons neared the top of the city, the giant wooden planks would be lowered to form a wide wooden bridge. The soldiers of the Northland Kingdom could then rush up to the top of the city. The siege wagons were very effective in sieging a city, but their weakness was also obvious. They could easily become huge live targets. The catapults could destroy them after a few hits. When a Northland army gradually approached the wall, Fireball stopped shooting. This was necessary. Otherwise, not only would they hurt their own troops, but they would also be unable to scale the walls. As the source of the fire was cut off, the flames began to die down. At this time, a large number of civilians rushed up the wall. They used the ice water that they had prepared to cool down the wall and carried away the charred remains of the German soldiers. They used fine sand to extinguish the flames that were still burning. At the same time, 10,000 German soldiers immediately entered the north wall from the east and west. Hundreds of smaller trebuchets were also installed and moved quickly. The German army was fighting for this short period of time. If they missed this golden opportunity, not only would Alonso's counterattack plan fail, but Blackstone Fort would also be in danger of being breached. This required the German army to be highly skilled and to be able to enter battle mode as quickly as possible. There was silence on the wall. Thousands of German Empire crossbowmen were ready. The first round of magic crystal cannons was also in place, waiting for the final order to fire. The counterattack was about to begin. Alonso stared sternly at the tens of thousands of Northland soldiers below the wall. At least 10,000 Northland soldiers had entered the range of the arrows. The 20 siege chariots were only a few hundred meters away from the wall. He could even see the murderous faces on the siege chariots. The time was right for a counterattack. Alonso gritted his teeth and ordered counterattack. As the drums sounded, thousands of arrows were fired from the top of the city walls. The thousands of Northland soldiers at the front were caught off guard and were shot down. The counterattack of the Delman army made the Northland soldiers even more excited. They yelled and pushed the siege wagons forward. The siege wagons rumbled forward, and the Northland soldiers below were aggressive. Suddenly, a black dot appeared in the sky. This was the magic crystal cannons of the Delman army. Within a range of 5 miles and 200 steps deep, 100 magic crystal cannons with white smoke fell from the sky. This was the first time the Northland soldiers had seen these black spheres. They all raised their heads and looked at these spheres in shock. Suddenly, a magic crystal cannon exploded above the heads of the Northland soldiers. A bright yellow light flashed in the sky, followed by an earth-shattering explosion. A cloud of black smoke rose up, and dozens of Northland soldiers were blown to pieces. Hundreds of Northland soldiers were blown away by the shockwave. There were countless casualties, and their metal shells were blown into pieces. The pieces were mixed with hundreds of small nails that were dipped in poison and shot out in all directions. Screams filled the air. Suddenly, a magic crystal cannon exploded above the heads of the Northland soldiers. A bright yellow light flashed in the sky, followed by an earth-shattering explosion. A cloud of black smoke rose up, and dozens of Northland soldiers were blown to pieces. Hundreds of Northland soldiers were blown away by the shockwave. The 99 magic crystal cannons exploded one after another in the middle of the crowd. The deafening sound of the explosion reverberated throughout the desert, shaking the earth. The intensity of the explosion was unbearable to watch. Extreme fear drove the Northland army into a frenzy. They threw down their weapons and fled, trampling on each other and pressing on each other. However, they had nowhere to go. Explosions and death were all around them. The battlefield seemed to have turned into a hell of slaughterhouse. Large chunks of exploded corpses and blood flowed like a river. The Northland army within 200 paces had suffered a catastrophe. They were like wheat fields that had been ravaged by a violent storm, collapsing in large swaths. There were barely any people left standing, only the wriggling in pools of blood. 12 of the 20 siege wagons had been blown up, their huge bodies either collapsed or lying on the ground, surrounded by corpses and flowing blood. The German army's first attack had almost wiped out the 10,000 Northland soldiers. There were many casualties. The Northland army had never seen such a violent weapon before. It was different from the magic crystal cannons they had seen before. The power of the magic crystal cannons was simply outrageous. In such a tragic battlefield, the army at the back was stunned for a moment before frantically fleeing. Even the soldiers operating the heavy catapults were terrified and fled with them. In an instant, the army was defeated like a landslide. At the moment of the explosion, King Gravel's heart almost stopped beating. He could not believe what he had heard and seen. There was actually such a violent weapon in the world. He could not think of a suitable word to describe his feelings. He could only feel a chill run down his spine, and he even felt a sense of despair. However, this thought only flashed through his mind. His arrogant personality made it impossible for him to accept such a failure. No, he had not failed yet. King Gravel pulled out his two-handed sword and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Don't run. Counterattack. Burn the Germans' army to the ground. Send the order to all the soldiers to press forward. Anyone who retreats will be beheaded. King Gravel, you can't be so foolish. You will destroy us." Saru Khan shouted desperately behind him. He had already seen through Alonso's strategy. He had given up on long-range weapons to lure the Arabian army to press forward. Then, he would use lightning to kill a large number of soldiers. However, King Gravel did not see through it at all. This made Saru Khan very anxious. "King Gravel, we can't press forward with the army. We will all die." Under King Gravel's command, the Northland army's drums rumbled. Almost 100 fireballs were fired towards the Germans' army. This time, the Germans' army quickly retreated. The entire northern wall was once again engulfed in a sea of fire. Under the encouragement of the drums, the Kingdom of Northland's army once again marched towards Blackstone Fort. Dozens of siege wagons slowly moved forward. At this time, a large battering ram appeared in the army. Under the pull of the horses, they approached the city gate step by step. This time, the Northland army did not give the Germans' army any chance to retaliate. Round after round of fireballs were thrown. Not only did the city gate burst into flames, even the walls and the interior of the city were set ablaze. However, the Germans' army remained silent and did not retaliate. Chapter 227. The Northland army was getting closer and closer. Once again, they entered the bloodiest battlefield. Many soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland began to rescue their comrades who were struggling in the pool of blood and quickly carried them away from the battlefield. Boom! A siege vehicle finally reached the west side of the city where there was no fire. A large wooden plank was lowered and hundreds of soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland rushed up the city walls with shields and spears in their hands. They shouted as they rushed towards the west side of the city walls. The siege vehicles formed a path for more soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland to climb up the city walls. However, the 2,000 German crossbowmen had been waiting for a long time. As soon as the Northland army rushed past the corner of the city walls, thousands of arrows were immediately fired. A dense rain of arrows blocked the path of the Kingdom of Northland soldiers. Within 70 steps, the powerful arrows pierced through their shields. Countless soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland were killed or injured. The first batch of soldiers who rushed up were almost completely wiped out. They quickly retreated and were suppressed in a narrow corner of the city walls. At this moment, the Northland army's nightmare came once again. Dozens of magic crystal cannons were fired from the east and west sides of the city walls. Although they could not shoot as far as 800 steps like the Kingdom of Northland's catapults, they could shoot as far as 500 steps, 300 steps, and even 200 steps. The three types of cannons intersected with each other and exploded violently in the middle of the densely packed Northland army. It was as if countless bloody waves had been stirred up in a black sea. Large swaths of the Kingdom of Northland soldiers were blown up. The Kingdom of Northland soldiers screamed in agony. Then, dozens of magic crystal cannons were fired one after another. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, and corpses were piled on top of each other. The casualties were extremely heavy. King Gravel was already in a state of semi-madness. He saw large swaths of soldiers being killed, and his eyes were bloodshot. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Catapults, move forward! Burn the east and west sides of the city to the ground." The trebuchet rumbled forward and advanced another 200 steps. Boom! Dozens of blazing fireballs flew across the sky, over the north wall, and headed towards the east and west sides of the city. On the west side of the city, a huge fireball whizzed towards the city. At the corner of the city, thousands of Northland soldiers who had rushed up the city wall were hiding behind the corner and engaged in a battle with the Derman's army. They never dreamed that the fire would reach them. Dozens of fireballs hit their hiding spot, and in an instant, the city wall was engulfed in flames. The soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland screamed in agony. Hundreds of people on fire ran in all directions with their hands up, but after a few steps, they fell to the ground. However, the ones who were affected the most were the siege wagons. For siege wagons that had just gotten close to the city wall were hit by the fireballs and immediately burst into flames. The thousands of Northland soldiers who had gathered in the siege wagons were in a mess. They trampled on each other as they ran for their lives. Those who were late were engulfed by the fire and were all burned alive in the siege wagons. 100 steps away from the west side of the city wall, the Derman's archers were also hit by the flames. In an instant, hundreds of Derman's soldiers were engulfed in flames. The Derman's soldiers quickly retreated. As more and more fireballs came, the flames were already close to the magic crystal cannons on the city wall. Next to the magic crystal cannons were magic crystal cannons, and the danger was beginning to appear. At this moment, a soldier rushed over and shouted, "The Marshal has ordered the magic crystal cannons to retreat immediately. The Marshal has ordered the magic crystal cannons to retreat immediately." The situation was extremely dangerous. Thousands of soldiers pushed the magic crystal cannons and rushed down the city wall. Those who were unable to retreat were instantly engulfed in flames. The Northland's fireballs covered the sky and covered the earth. The entire northern part of Blackstone Fort was engulfed in flames. The city was in chaos. Terrified residents screamed and retreated to the south of the city. Many of them could not escape in time and were engulfed in the flames. Boom! A magic crystal cannons exploded in the flames, causing the tunnel to collapse. The remaining 400 Derman soldiers had no way to escape and died tragically in the flames. The magic crystal cannons flew over the city wall and were shot towards the densely packed Kingdom of Northland soldiers outside the city. When a black magic crystal cannons flew out, the Kingdom of Northland soldiers were immediately terrified and scrambled to escape. However, the Northland soldiers were too densely packed. Every time a magic crystal cannons exploded, dozens of people would die tragically. The Kingdom of Northland soldiers retreated time and time again, but they were chased back again and again. King Gravel had given strict orders to take down Blackstone Fort at all costs and capture Alonso alive. At this time, King Gravel placed all his hopes on the battering ram. He also noticed that the magic crystal cannons that the Derman soldiers shot from the inner city were mostly concentrated on the two sides of the city. There were almost no magic crystal cannons in the middle of the city. This gave him a glimmer of hope to take down the city gate. The ground shook as thousands of Kingdom of Northland soldiers pushed the battering ram forward with all their might. The horses that were originally pulling the battering ram were already paralyzed by the horror of the battle and were no longer willing to exert themselves. They could only rely on manpower. This battering ram was much larger than the one used by the German soldiers. The frame of the battering ram alone was 30 meters long. With the addition of the wooden frame, it was 150 meters long and 40 meters tall. It required 3,000 men to move it. This battering ram was the weapon used to take down Rayleigh Town. The Northland people called it God's Wrath, and it was made by 2,000 craftsmen in Galgalin. The 3,000 Kingdom of Northland soldiers shouted rhythmically as the battering ram rumbled forward. 2 fireballs landed in front of the city gate, and flames rose into the sky. The battering ram advanced amidst the flames and explosions. At this time, a magic crystal cannons landed in the crowd beside the battering ram and exploded violently. The powerful shock wave sent dozens of people flying. Blue iron nails shot out in all directions, and screams filled the air. The battering ram suddenly tilted to the left, and the chains rattled. The huge battering ram swayed left and right, scaring 2 Northland soldiers into shouting in unison. The battering ram finally stabilized. The battering ram continued to move forward. After another 100 steps, it finally reached the city gate. At this time, more than 2,000 Kingdom of Northland soldiers pulled on the chains with all their might. They roared as they retreated. The battering ram was gradually pulled higher. An officer raised a flag and waved it down. The soldiers released the chains together, and the battering ram slammed into the city gate. It was like an earth-shattering blow. Boom! With a dull thud, everyone's hearts almost jumped out of their chests. The city gate shook violently, and cracks appeared on the bricks that had just been repaired. Within the city, the huge impact caused the city walls to shake as if there was an earthquake. 2 large rocks at the edge fell and almost crushed the German soldiers below. One of the German officers saw that the situation was not good and ran to the back. He rushed through the flames and quickly found Alonso, who was commanding the magic crystal cannons. Marshal, the enemy is using a battering ram to attack the city gate. It's too powerful. I'm afraid the gate won't be able to withstand it, the officer reported. Chapter 228. Alonso also felt the tremors under his feet. However, the towering observation tower in the middle of the city was too large and blocked the attack route. The catapults could not reach the city gates, and the tower was surrounded by raging flames. Alonso could not help but sigh. The Northland Army's fireballs were indeed too powerful. At this moment, there was another violent tremor. The battering ram hit the city gates again. Alonso frowned. He knew that the newly repaired bricks were not yet dry and could not withstand the heavy impact of the battering ram. He looked up at the top of the city walls again. The fireballs flying over the city walls seemed to have weakened. The Kingdom of Northland's catapults could not withstand the frequent attacks. There was only one way now. He ordered magic crystal cannons. At this moment, the Northland army below shouted again. The officer shouted, and a loud boom was heard. With a dull thud, everyone felt as though their hearts were about to explode. The city wall shook violently, and dozens of Delman soldiers lost their footing and fell into the flames. In an instant, their bodies were covered in flames, and even their heads were set ablaze. The surrounding Delman soldiers hurriedly pulled them over and beat them up. Even so, there were still dozens of people who were burned to death. The Northland army cheered outside the city gates. The gate was already broken open. If they hit it again, the gate would break and the Northland army would rush into the city. The situation was extremely dangerous, but Alonso was destined to change history. Just as the Northland army was cheering, 3 round black iron balls were thrown from the top of the city walls. They emitted white smoke and landed on the floor of the battering ram. The hundreds of Kingdom of Northland soldiers were scared out of their wits. They turned around and ran, but it was too late. One of the magic crystal cannons exploded violently, blowing hundreds of soldiers into the air. The other 2 cannons were blown away and landed in the crowd behind them. They exploded one after another, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. The floor of the battering ram was blown apart, and dozens of thick pillars were broken. The frame could no longer support the battering ram, which weighed tens of thousands of pounds and collapsed. Iron chains flew everywhere, and the battering ram, which was 10 feet in diameter and 10 feet in length, fell down and smashed hundreds of Kingdom of Northland soldiers into meat paste. The remaining survivors shouted and turned around to run. The collapse of the battering ram had turned the tide of the battle. The morale of the Northland army was low, and they did not want to fight anymore. King Gravel was shocked. He looked at the soldiers who were blown up by the Derman army. The army was no longer in formation, and almost half of the soldiers were gone. Blackstone Fort was still standing in the fire. He finally realized that he had committed a heinous crime. Retreat. He was so angry that he blacked out and fainted. This was an extremely tragic battle. The two sides did not engage in close combat. Instead, they used their most violent weapons to attack each other. However, the casualties of the Kingdom of Northland far exceeded that of the Derman army. Although close to 5,000 Derman soldiers were burned to death, the Northland army had lost more than 15,000 soldiers in just one morning. The Derman army had already fired more than 200 magic crystal cannons. The tragic siege of the first day finally came to an end. Alonso watched as the Northland army slowly retreated. He could clearly see that the morale of the Northland army was very low. They carried a large number of injured soldiers with them. There were at least 10,000 of them. Alonso narrowed his eyes. His expression was complicated. No one knew what he was thinking. The battle had ended. The Northland army retreated to their camp 10 miles away. However, the stench of burnt corpses still lingered in the air. The Northland camp was full of injured Northland soldiers. Many of them died and were carried away. Many of them were poisoned, and their wounds were black and swollen with pus flowing out. The Northland army doctors were too busy to treat them. The soldiers could only deal with it themselves. They used knives to cut off the poisoned flesh, and some even chopped off their arms. Screams of pain rang out one after another, and morale was at an all-time low. In the tent, King Gravel was lying on his bed with lifeless eyes. An officer was reporting to him the latest battle report. There were 19,000 soldiers who did not return from the battlefield. There were another 6,000 injured soldiers in the retreating army. There were many who died from their injuries, and the rest had lost their ability to fight. In just half a day of battle, half of his army had been killed or injured. Although he had the upper hand on the surface, and the Derman army was unable to fight back against his kerosene bombs, in reality, he was the one who had suffered a crushing defeat. King Gravel's heart was filled with pain. He suddenly felt something sweet in his throat and spat out a mouthful of blood. Several army doctors hurriedly helped him stop the bleeding. King Gravel waved his hand and said in a weak voice, "Go and invite Khan Seru here." A guard went out and invited Khan Seru into the tent. Khan Seru's face was gloomy, and he did not say a word. King Gravel sighed and said, "Khan Seru, I was wrong. I was too careless. I apologize." This was probably the first time in King Gravel's life that he had ever apologized. Seru looked up and sighed. "I'm actually not afraid of the Delman army's magic crystal cannons, because our fireballs are no less powerful than them. What I'm afraid of is Alonso's tactics. I'm sure your highness has seen it with your own eyes. The Delman army actually has the same heavy weapons as us. If they had fired the magic crystal cannons at us from the start, we wouldn't even have had the chance to throw the fireballs. But they didn't. This is the terrifying part of Alonso's tactics. He would rather be in a passive position in order to lure our army in and then use the magic crystal cannons to kill our soldiers. This is Alonso's strategy to annihilate our forces. Has your highness ever thought of the consequences?" King Gravel lowered his head and did not say a word. Khan Seru glanced at him and said slowly, "I only thought it through later. But no matter what, we are no match for the Derman's magic crystal cannons. Their magic crystal cannons are too powerful." King Gravel's face was pale as he muttered to himself, "No, I already said that the Derman army's magic crystal cannons are not powerful. It's Alonso's tactics that are more powerful." Khan Seru saw that King Gravel was still stubborn and only recognized the weapons. He couldn't help but feel bitter. But now, what was done could not be undone. It was too late to say anything. Chapter 229. We had a chance to defeat him. As long as we pretended to run out of supplies and retreated, Alonso would be forced to chase after us. Or he could abandon the city and retreat to the south. As long as we lured him away from Blackstone Castle, we could send more troops to cut off his escape route. The main force would then launch a counterattack, and we would have the advantage in numbers. Even if the Derman had magic crystal cannons, they wouldn't be a match for us. We would definitely win this battle. Unfortunately, we were tricked by his bait and didn't seize the opportunity. King Gravel's face turned pale. After a while, he grumbled, "But you didn't mention this plan at the time." Saru Khan was speechless. In fact, he had only thought of this plan later, but it was too late. He didn't understand Alonso's true intentions at first, but he slowly understood later. Neither of them spoke, and the tent was silent. After a while, King Gravel said in a hoarse voice, "Then what should we do now? Should we retreat to lure him out?" Saru Khan shook his head. "It's too late now. We don't have the advantage in numbers, and our morale is low. We also have so many injured soldiers. We don't have the advantage, and our fireballs are almost used up. The Derman's crossbows are basically unused. Even if we fight, we might not be a match for them. Now, we can only retreat while he's unprepared." At this moment, they suddenly felt the ground shake, and the silver water bottle on the table fell to the ground. They couldn't help but look at each other. Then, a soldier stumbled into the tent with an urgent report. "Your Highness, it's not good. The Derman's cavalry is here." If the Northland army had been stationed in the south of the city, Alonso might have hesitated. After all, the Northland army still had more than half of their troops. In addition, the south of the city was covered in mountains and forests. The Derman's army wouldn't have the upper hand. However, the north of the city was different. There was no forest in the north of the city anymore. Instead, it was a vast expanse of open land. That was why Alonso decided to ambush Norland's army. He could not let them retreat. In order to achieve his strategy, he had to wipe out Norland's army. On the open ground, the Delman cavalry covered the sky and charged forward. Their hooves stomped on the ground, causing dust to fly into the air. It was as if a sandstorm was sweeping towards the Northland camp. The Northland soldiers had just returned to their barracks tiredly and had not eaten dinner yet. Some of them were treating their wounds, while others were lying down to sleep. No one would have thought that the Derman army would suddenly attack them right after the end of the war. Generally speaking, even if the war continued, they should have attacked them when they retreated and not now. The alarm bells in the Northland barracks rang. Clang! The sound was ear-piercing. The barracks were in chaos. The wounded soldiers screamed, cried, and begged their comrades to take them away. At this moment, Lord Horf and his two sons ran out of the barracks. They were so shocked that their faces changed. The Derman cavalry was only 3 Dermans away from their barracks. The murderous aura almost suffocated them. Lord Horf's second son, Ackerman, was so scared that he trembled and could not say a word. "Quick! Use the catapults to attack." "Lord Horf, the catapults are under repair. They can't be used." "Bastards! Then use bows and crossbows. Pass down my order." "Archers, rush to the barracks to stop them. Get on your horses and prepare for battle." Lord Horf roared. The order was passed down, and thousands of archers rushed to the front of the camp. At this moment, the Delman army cavalry charged forward like a raging tide, moving as fast as lightning. They were less than a mile away from the Northland camp. Their black Empire armor shone coldly under the sunlight, and the densely packed spears were like a forest. The sound of their hooves was like thunder on the ground. A single cavalry charging forward would be impressive, and 100 cavalry charging forward would be terrifying. However, now that the cavalry was charging across the vast expanse of land, they were like a herd of wild bulls in the future, causing the heavens and earth to change color. When there were only 300 steps left, the panicked Northland army began to shoot. Thousands of arrows formed a net in the air. The Derman raised their shields and waved their spears with one hand. Their battle cries shook the sky. Countless Derman horses were shot down by the arrows, and there were also Derman cavalrymen who were shot and fell off their horses. However, The German cavalry had only fired one volley before they were right in front of them. The archers didn't even have the chance to turn around and escape. In a split second, the vast army of Northland cavalrymen charged into the Northland archers like a raging storm. They charged into the enemy's formation and swept the Northland archers under the hooves of the horses. Their swords cut off their necks, and their spears pierced their chests. They slaughtered and destroyed everything in their path. Then, with a loud bang, the German cavalry and the Northland cavalrymen who hadn't fully formed their formation collided violently. The two armies engaged in a fierce battle. No one cared about the injured soldiers, as they couldn't participate in the battle. They scattered in all directions, each trying to find a way to survive. The German cavalrymen were all burly and strong. They were like two iron fists on the left and right of the Northland army. They were responsible for cutting the Northland army into chaos. The German army's morale was greatly boosted. The drum beats were like thunder, encouraging the German army to fight bravely. Although they only had half of the enemy's forces, they were able to force the Northland army to retreat. Lord Horf commanded the Northland cavalrymen to fight to the death with the German army. Under Horf's powerful command, the Northland cavalrymen gradually stabilized their formation and engaged in a bloody battle with the German army. This battle lasted from the afternoon until late at night. The battlefield had shifted to the north. At this point, the Northland cavalrymen had been reduced to a few thousand, while the German army had suffered several thousand casualties. Their casualties were close to half. Normally, an army would retreat after losing 30% of its soldiers. If they lost 50% of their soldiers, they would be defeated. However, the two armies today had broken this rule. They knew very well who would be defeated and who would persevere to the end would be the victor. This concept was deeply ingrained in the hearts of every officer and soldier. Regardless of whether it was the German or the Northland, neither of them dared to retreat. They gave it their all and fought to the death. This battle was so fierce that even the German's commander-in-chief, Alonso, was shot in the left shoulder by an enemy arrow. Blood gushed out his wound. He bandaged it and refused to retreat. He knew that if he did, it would greatly affect the morale of the German army. As long as he was there, he would be able to motivate the German army to fight to the end. Commander-in-Chief Alonso's adjutant was also shot dead by Ackermann's brother, Patrick. He chopped off his head with his own hands. However, at the same time, his stomach was pierced by a German spear. His intestines flowed out and he fainted. He was rescued by his bodyguards. Ackermann witnessed all of this with his own eyes. He almost went crazy. Chapter 230. Ackermann held 2 axes in his hands, and his eyes were bloodshot. He was like a wild beast. When he saw his brother, Patrick, who was seriously injured, being rescued by others, he went crazy. He was crazy. He worshipped his brother very much. The Northland people had already suffered a lot in this expedition to Blackstone Fort. They had suffered many casualties, and the situation was not optimistic. Just as they were about to retreat back to the Kingdom of Northland, the Empire's soldiers were still relentless and sent their cavalry to attack them. In the midst of the chaos, the Northland people suffered many casualties. In addition, many of the Northland people were already injured and had to retreat from the siege. The Northland people were about to face an unprecedented defeat. However, with Lord Horf and Ackermann's brother, Patrick, at the front lines, there was still some resistance. They were not defeated by the Empire's soldiers in one blow. However, when he saw his brave brother almost die in front of him, Ackermann thought of his brother's wife, Jenny. He did not know what to say to his sister-in-law. He was blinded by hatred. He wanted to use his own strength to reverse the situation. He knew that he was insignificant, but he did not want to retreat anymore. He wanted to bravely welcome the Supreme God with open arms. He waved his axes like a berserker. His eyes were red and bathed in blood. He was not afraid of death and prayed to die in battle. He chopped the German cavalrymen off their horses and chopped off their heads. He did not stop. The German cavalryman's armor was cut into pieces and blood splattered all over his face. He roared, bit, and killed so many Delmans that they had to go around him. He snatched the Derman's horse and jumped on it. Like a flash of lightning, he rode the enemy's horse and rushed into the Derman army. At this time, the Northland people were fighting and retreating. Many of the injured soldiers had given up and were preparing to return to the temple of God. What no one expected was that one person, one horse, was galloping in the opposite direction of the retreat. This was simply courting death. There was no hope at all. Everyone shook their heads. They did not believe that any miracle would happen. Now that the German Empire had won, this battle was bound to end with the defeat of the Northland people. But to everyone's surprise, they were wrong. They were ridiculously wrong, because what happened next was that they would be fortunate enough to participate in a war that would go down in history and witness what was called a true miracle. When Ackerman charged into the enemy's formation, the Derman's army was momentarily stunned. They had never expected something like this to happen. At this moment, King Gravel led some of his personal guards and Sarukagin's men over. At this moment, Lord Half, who was in the midst of the chaotic battle, did not expect that person to be his youngest son. It was not until a Northland officer reported to him some of the situation on the battlefield that he hurriedly organized his men to counterattack. After all, the person who charged into the German Empire's army was none other than his youngest son. Now that his eldest son was seriously injured and his life was in danger, he had to protect his youngest son, Ackerman, at all costs. At this time, the Northland people, who had suffered a heavy setback, were gradually recovering. When they saw Ackerman fighting bravely without any regard for his own safety, their blood was ignited and they placed all their hopes on him. But even so, Ackerman could not hold on any longer. He was hit by 3 arrows, one of which hit the left side of his abdomen. He almost fainted, but he fought on with all his might. At this time, both sides were exhausted and were about to collapse. It was a matter of who could hold on until the end. But at this moment, an army, like a cunning wolf, pounced on the Derman's back at the most critical moment. This army was Sarukan's Kurut cavalry. He had been waiting for an opportunity. Finally, when both sides could not hold on any longer, his fresh troops suddenly appeared. Sarukan's Kurut cavalry was the straw that broke the camel's back. In the darkness, Kurut's elite cavalry charged forward, killing the Derman until blood flowed like a river. Like the sharpest dagger, they stabbed into the Derman's back. The Derman collapsed. Sarukan's roar was like thunder. His sword flew, and the Derman's heads rolled and screamed. One of the Derman officers was furious. He roared and stabbed at Sarukan with a spear. Sarukan chuckled and dodged the spear. Then, he swung his saber at Delman's neck. The saber was as fast as lightning. Poor Delman was already exhausted. He couldn't dodge Sarukan's saber. Poof! Half of the officer's head was chopped off. His horse fled with the corpse in tow. Sarukan laughed maniacally. With Sarukan's quick attack, the Derman's left wing began to collapse. Soon, the right wing was affected. The German Empire's cavalry fled in all directions. Alonso knew that the battle was over. He sighed and shouted to the sky, "It seems that it will be difficult to achieve such results in the future." At this moment, he suddenly saw Ackerman charging in. His spirits were lifted. If he could kill this man, then the battle would be lost, but at least the morale would not be affected. He raised his sword and shouted to the cavalry following him, "Follow me and kill that bastard." Under the moonlight, Ackerman was like a god of death. He had been shot multiple times, but his will to fight did not diminish. He did not feel fatigue or pain. He only knew how to kill. Alonso ordered everyone to rush forward. In fact, he wanted to leave someone alive because he still had a trump card in his hand, which was Anna. All the Derman soldiers charged forward, but under Ackerman's 2 axes, they were quickly reduced to a pile of minced meat or corpses. He raised his head and looked at the sky. A bright crescent moon hung in the velvet-like night sky. It was exceptionally bright. His vision gradually blurred. He looked at Alonso, who was leading the troops, and said with difficulty, "It's your honor to die in my hands." After he finished speaking, he rushed forward. Along the way, almost no one could stop him. Alonso was a little scared and trembling. He could only retreat on his horse. When the Derman saw that their marshal had retreated, they were also frightened by the blood-soaked madman. The Derman was finally defeated under the desperate resistance of the Northland people. They felt that these Northland madmen were too scary. King Gravel and Lord Horf finally returned with their troops. Seeing this situation, the Delmans could not accept the fact that a single person had turned the tides of a battle that they were supposed to win. However, there was nothing they could do about it. This was the truth. Alonso looked at the blood-soaked Ackerman one last time. "I'll remember you. I'm willing to call you the strongest Northland man." He then retreated to Blackstone Fort without looking back. Chapter 231. In this battle, Sarukagan vented all the resentment he had accumulated from being beaten up by Alonso all this time. King Gravel and Horf also rescued Ackerman, who was covered in wounds. As expected, Ackerman died. His sacrifice made Horf grieve. Ackerman wept when he heard the news. After this battle, Ackerman's position in the hearts of the Northland people was very high. Everyone called him Berserker Ackerman. Both sides thought that the battle would last for months, but it ended in just a day. The war progressed so quickly that it exceeded everyone's expectations. It was also the bloodiest battle between the Derman and the Northland people in the past few years. Both sides used their most violent weapons and slaughtered to the extreme. This battle was later named the Battle of Blackstone Fort by historians. However, the impact of this battle was extremely far-reaching. It destroyed the final glory of the Empire and started a new war. Alonso led his army back to Blackstone Fort. He personally wrote a letter to King Gravel, who was stationed outside the city. "I hope that we can sit down and have a good talk." At this time, a guard rushed into Gravel's tent. "Your Majesty, Alonso has sent someone to deliver a letter to your Majesty." He didn't know what Alonso wanted to do. "Bring him in." Soon, a dozen guards brought in two young German Empire officials. One of them bowed to King Gravel and said in Northland language, "I am here on the orders of Marshal Alonso of the German Empire to deliver a letter and a gift to your Majesty." Speaking of gifts, the young official behind him placed a wooden box on the table. King Gravel took the letter but didn't look at it. He stared at the wooden box. That ominous feeling rose in his heart again. He seemed to smell a trace of blood. "Open the box." He took a deep breath and ordered his guards. At this time, the imperial official and his companions had already retreated to the wall, and a cold smile appeared on their faces. Two guards stepped forward and used a dagger to pry open the wooden box. They opened the lid and peeled off a layer of oil paper. Suddenly, the two of them cried out in alarm. One of the guards cried out, and his face turned pale. He retreated a few steps and stared at the item in the box. One of the guards shouted, "Your Majesty, it's a hand." King Gravel saw clearly that there was a bloody hand in the box. It was the right hand of Anna, whom he had high hopes for. King Gravel only felt an unbearable pain in his heart, as if a knife had been ruthlessly stabbed into his heart. His vision became blurry, and his body swayed. It seemed that he was about to fall. A few of the guards hurriedly supported him. The other two guards roared and drew their swords and rushed towards the imperial official. "Stop!" King Gravel stopped them. After all, he was the army of a country. He finally restrained himself from losing his composure. Then, a huge wave of sadness came over him. He knew that Anna was finished. His newly formed Northland heavy infantry was also finished. He stared blankly at the wooden box for a long time. Finally, he opened his mouth. His voice was unusually low as he asked the imperial official, "What does your marshal mean?" The imperial official stepped forward and bowed. "What the marshal wants to say is in the letter. Your Majesty, please take a look." King Gravel slowly picked up the letter and saw that it said, "To His Majesty Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland." Kingdom? King Gravel laughed bitterly. This Alonso actually used such a title. It was really ironic and unprecedented. He opened the letter. Alonso wrote at the beginning of the letter, "German Empire's Marshal Alonso William to His Majesty Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland. I am willing to have a sincere conversation with your Majesty." This was written by Alonso himself. His words were full of sincerity. King Gravel sighed. It was written very clearly in the letter that his Northland heavy cavalry had been completely wiped out. Alonso advised him to face reality. King Gravel read the letter again and again. He fell into deep thought. No one dared to disturb him. The imperial official also stood quietly at the side, waiting for his reply. After an unknown period of time, King Gravel seemed to wake up from a dream. He nodded gently. "All right, please tell your marshal that I am willing to have a talk with him." In the kingdom of Northland's military camp, Ackerman sat in the room with his upper body naked. A military doctor was carefully changing his dressing. The arrow wound was not serious at first, but the wound had ruptured and become infected. At this time, the military doctor cleaned Ackerman's wound and applied medicine. He solemnly said, "The injury is more serious. You can't use your strength for 3 months. You can't fight for a year. Otherwise, you won't be able to fight for the rest of your life." Ackerman only felt a dull pain in his left abdomen. After the medicine was applied, he immediately felt a cooling sensation. He sighed softly. "Speaking of which, I'm still lucky. My brother's intestines were all ruptured. I don't know how to tell my sister-in-law about this." Thinking of this, Ackerman felt like a knife was being twisted in his heart. Although this battle had repelled the Derman's plan and completely destroyed the Northland Expeditionary Force, the current situation was not optimistic. Ackerman was not the bravest in the entire kingdom of Northland. However, without a doubt, his performance this time had caused everyone to respect him. Everyone called him Berserker Ackerman. Ackerman's injury was not light. It seemed that he really needed to rest for a while. He thought of Isabella. Princess Isabella of Denmark was very dissatisfied that King Gravel did not bring her with him on this expedition. He wondered if Princess Isabella's attitude towards him would be different from before when he returned to Gorgolon after this expedition. After a while, Lord Horf came to see his son. He was deeply saddened by Patrick's death, but the living had their own matters to attend to. Patrick's death was glorious. He was a warrior of Northland, and he was destined to drink with the martyrs in the hall of Valhalla of god Olliger, staying up all night. Horf soldiers all wore white strips of cloth. This was a Northland custom. It was to cheer for those who died in battle. Gravel communicated with Saru Khan. He explained Alonso's intentions and showed Saru Khan Anna's hand and Alonso's letter. Saru Khan sighed softly. He knew that this victory was actually a Pyrrhic victory. It was also thanks to Ackerman's perseverance and stubbornness. The current situation was not optimistic. They could only say that negotiations were necessary. At the very least, it would take time to recover the soldiers' morale. This could be delayed through negotiations. Chapter 232. In the end, after several rounds of discussion, the two sides finally agreed to hold the negotiations in an open space outside Blackstone Castle. The time was noon one day later. Time passed quickly, and the weather started to get a little cold in the morning. When the autumn sun shone warmly on the ground, a huge white tent appeared outside Blackstone Castle. Both sides sent out 100 people to help set up the tent. The layout was very simple, with a thick carpet on the ground and a long table in the middle. The negotiation agreement was written in Derman and Northland. There was not much content. The first topic was to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. From the day the agreement came into effect, both sides would not fight for 5 years. The actual border would be the ceasefire line, and the German Empire would acknowledge the kingdom of Northland's sphere of influence. Since the German Empire had signed a military treaty with the Kuruth Kingdom, the German Empire had the obligation to amend the treaty with the Kuruth Kingdom. Within 5 years, as long as the Kuruth Kingdom abided by the armistice and did not initiate a military attack on the German Empire, the German Empire would return Larma to the Kuruth Kingdom. Both sides were very careful in their choice of words, and there were compromises. At noon, the agreed time arrived. According to the agreement, both sides would head to the large tent outside Blackstone Castle at the same time. Each side could only bring 3 assistants and 10 assistants. Both sides would send people to supervise the other side, and every detail was considered flawlessly. "Harukagen, let's go." King Gravel smiled faintly. Harukagen bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, after you. He accompanied King Gravel to the large tent, but in his heart, he was secretly thinking about how to maximize his benefits. Kagen Seru, I am serious about signing this agreement. I intend to not think about going south for 5 years and focus on developing trade. I wonder if Kagen Seru is interested? Gravel said sincerely to Kagen Seru. There were no permanent enemies, and there were no permanent friends. Both of them laughed, and their laughter was incomparably dry. Just as Gravel and Seru-Khan arrived at the tent, Alonso's team arrived as well. Behind him were some Imperial soldiers. King Gravel and Alonso dismounted from their horses and greeted each other with open arms. Gravel, we haven't seen each other in years. Your body is still so healthy. The two of them laughed and hugged each other tightly, as if they were best friends who had not seen each other for 30 years. Come, let's go in together. The two of them held each other's arms and walked into the tent intimately. Who would have thought that they had just finished the most tragic battle? The guard from both sides behind them all smiled bitterly. What a hypocritical politics. The tent was already prepared, and the two of them sat down on their respective seats. After a round of discussion, the people from both sides and Seru-Kagin also engaged in an intense discussion. After all, what was on the table was the most important thing for both sides. The two of them looked at each other and laughed tacitly. However, I do have a special gift for your Majesty. Alonso stopped smiling. King Gravel felt that Alonso was implying something, so he stopped smiling and asked, What special gift does the general want to give me? Don't tell me it's another wooden box. Alonso smiled and did not answer. Instead, he picked up the armistice agreement in front of him and read it carefully. King Gravel was puzzled, but he did not ask. After a while, Alonso put down the document and took out a pen from the pen holder beside him. He officially signed his name on the document, Alonso William. He signed 3 books in a row and put down the pen. The clerk next to him stamped the document. King Gravel also signed his name with a goose feather pen and stamped the document at the same time. Then they exchanged documents and signed again. When the last red seal was stamped, the armistice agreement was finally signed. At this time, Alonso put down the pen and smiled faintly at King Gravel. In order to show my sincerity, I will release all the prisoners of war from your army, including General Anna. This is my special gift to your Majesty. It had been half a month since the agreement. During this period, Kevin had been very busy. The work that was originally done by Highside the Elder was now all piled up in front of him. Although there were other people helping him, Kevin was not as diligent as his father. He had been feeling impatient for a long time. The only thing he was interested in was the mercenary training camp built next to Bauhinia Manor. Ever since that meeting, Kevin had built the mercenary training camp. In fact, the whole training camp was a huge magic array. The people who lived and trained in it every day were all carefully selected by Kevin. They were all young people with strong mental power. The people who were trained here were all mages, and those little noble mages became the instructors there, of course. Of course, this training method was not something that Kevin could come up with. In fact, it was also a suggestion from King Gravel. In addition to teaching Kevin this strange training method, King Gravel also taught him how to use these relatively weak, low-level mages. These people were divided into several groups according to their talents. Each group specialized in a specific type of magic. Some practiced the fast gathering of fire elements, some practiced the control of wind elements, and some learned the most basic use of fireball magic. With the help of the magic array, all the operations were relatively simple. Originally, it would take years of hard work to achieve results. Now, in just half a month, the initial results could be seen. Throughout the whole training, the most difficult thing to master was the cooperation between each group. Some people continuously gathered fire elements, while others transformed the gathered fire elements into fireballs. Then, the noble mages further compressed these fireballs into powerful fireballs. Finally, they used special wind magic to push the fireballs 500 to 600 meters away. Even a superior magician would not be able to continuously cast such a high-level spell. The amount of magic energy required to cast such a spell was too much for an individual. Chapter 233. The method provided by King Gravel solved the problem of gathering magical energy, shaping fire elements, high-density compression of fire elements, and long-distance transportation. Gathering the strength of a few people to share the huge consumption of magical energy and extremely difficult magical manipulation skills. However, the close cooperation between each other was the key to the success of this combination of magic. Kevin could no longer remember how many explosions had occurred during the training. Although Kevin had customized a special and powerful fire elemental defensive armor for each of the magic students, there were still terrifying explosions from time to time. Fortunately, the hospital was nearby, so none of the students were seriously injured or disabled. However, the magic students who still had lingering fears still gave Kevin the title of Demon Instructor. However, although everyone complained, no one proposed to withdraw from the mercenary training. There was a long queue at the entrance of the training camp, and there was an endless stream of people who applied to participate in the training. Many of them were nobles and rich businessmen. There were even some knights who came in to join the fun. Although Kevin was more enthusiastic about the training of the Magic Mercenary Corps in the initial stage, when the training was on the right track, there was no need for him to supervise personally every day. The county governor's daughter was fully qualified to be an instructor. Moreover, Belladonna had specially selected a group of experienced believers of the goddess to provide emergency treatment to the injured from the explosions at any time. On the other hand, these injured people who kept appearing became the best test subject for the believers of the goddess. Many novel and effective emergency treatment methods emerged under the close exchange of pointers between the two sides. This was also something that Mayfair did not expect. Kevin's interest had already returned to the practice of magic. This was because this guy suddenly discovered a type of magic that was suitable for people like him to practice, and that was fire magic. Kevin tried hard to persuade himself that it was not because of his damned curiosity, but because he wanted to avenge his father in the future. Therefore, he had to master a type of powerful magic that could be used in actual combat. His original magic was quite suitable to teach some ungrateful fellows a lesson, but it was useless in a battle of life and death. The only thing that could really be used to kill the enemy was the move that Heist the Elder taught him. However, although that move was powerful, it could not be used to deal with a group of enemies. Moreover, none of his previous magic was useful. The tedious incantation made Kevin lose his patience. This kind of magic was not very useful on the battlefield. Ever since his father passed away, Kevin did not have the wise guidance of the elder. For a while, it seemed that many things could not be done. Every time this happened, he would think of the magical creature, King Gravel. Just like his father, King Gravel's wisdom had always been trusted by Kevin. However, every time Kevin received King Gravel's advice, he would always think twice before falling into King Gravel's trap. Recently, Kevin did everything quite smoothly. Under the guidance of King Gravel, and with the help of those little mages, the Magic Mercenary Corps was successfully established. Due to the recent tense situation, the originally trained ordinary mercenaries were borrowed by those rich merchants. They either served as their personal bodyguards or were responsible for training the mercenaries. Even the prefectural governor came forward to invite those mercenaries to form the village guardian corps. Because of this, mercenaries suddenly became a fashionable profession. As a mercenary guide, Kevin got whatever he wanted during this period. Those rich merchants were not stingy with their money and goods in order to protect their lives. However, all this did not make Kevin happy because those rich merchants relied on him and his mercenaries more. The originally bustling Gorgon had now become a worried and melancholic city. In this city, only Princess Isabella of Denmark and her ignorant subordinates could still laugh and enjoy life. This young lady was so careless that everything in front of her could not affect her at all. She still had to hold a ball, as usual. In the beginning, those nobles came to support her and flatter her. However, As the tense atmosphere in Gorgon became more and more intense, no one was in the mood to attend the ball. Therefore, Isabella could invite fewer and fewer guests. However, she never cared about this. Anyway, those nights under her command were more noisy than 5 or 6 people, so she never felt awkward. On the other hand, Kevin attended Isabella's ball every time, but he did not like this kind of entertainment that was incompatible with his life. On the one hand, Kevin used this as an excuse to escape from a lot of troublesome affairs that should have been handled by him. On the other hand, the sumptuous food at the ball was what really attracted Kevin. This time, Princess Isabella of Denmark was far more prepared than Kevin for this inspection. She even brought her own cookout to cook delicious food for herself. Sitting alone in the corner, Kevin, who was holding a plate full of delicious food, savored the food while enjoying the interesting scene in front of him. On the dance floor in the middle of the hall, Princess Isabella was wearing an elegant and gorgeous dress. She was dancing with another person. This wasn't a big deal, but the dance partner was also a young and beautiful girl. That was a rare sight. However, Kevin Kelvin had seen such a scene many times, so he gradually got used to it. In fact, after so many balls, Kevin had never seen Princess Isabella of Denmark dance with a man. The melodious music drifted through the entire hall, making Kevin forget his troubles for a moment. All the urgent documents that needed to be handled dissipated in the beautiful music in an instant. Just as Kevin was leisurely enjoying the beautiful music, the music quickly changed 2 notes and ended. Kevin knew that Princess Isabella of Denmark was no longer interested in dancing. Kevin had always been curious. How did Princess Isabella of Denmark instruct the musicians to end the music? Kevin had been paying attention for a long time, but he had never seen Princess Isabella of Denmark make any gestures or secret signals. Just as Kevin was about to get to the bottom of this, driven by his curiosity, Princess Isabella of Denmark gradually walked towards him. Chapter 234. Princess Isabella of Denmark wasn't someone Kevin dared to entertain. Seeing her approach made him feel uncomfortable. Thankfully, Kevin wasn't too interested in her. "Master Kevin, do you know where His Majesty's envoy is?" Princess Isabella of Denmark asked. I don't know. How would I know?" Kevin said awkwardly. "How could you not know? Don't worry, I won't eat her. I just have some business to discuss with her." Princess Isabella of Denmark explained. Kevin thought to himself, discussing official business? Who believed that? However, on the surface, Kevin had to be able to justify himself. Therefore, he said, "I really don't know where she is. I only have myself by my side. You should be very clear about this. If I had someone by my side, there's no way they wouldn't know, would there? Who knows? Your Excellency is omnipotent, so what's impossible?" Princess Isabella thought for a moment, and then mysteriously whispered into Kevin's ear, "Do you know? Her Majesty the Empress Dowager has ordered Cabrillo to bring his niece to the palace. The Empress Dowager wishes to see the beauty herself. She wishes to officiate at the young lady's wedding. All preparations have already begun. Once she returns to the capital, she will begin." Kevin was at a loss for words when he heard this. Thankfully, Princess Isabella of Denmark thought he was panicking from the shock of the news and didn't let the cat out of the bag. Princess Isabella of Denmark continued, "I'm the only one who can help the young lady out of her predicament. I can ask His Majesty to step in and suppress this matter for the time being. However, I will have to wait for the young lady to appear before I can discuss this matter with her." Princess Isabella of Denmark's words had Kevin thinking, is there really such a good thing in this world? Wouldn't that be like a lamb walking into a tiger's den? Aren't you the same as Huggison? Being with you, I'm afraid it's even more dangerous. Thinking of this, Kevin smiled and said, "Princess Isabella of Denmark, if I have the honor of meeting that young lady, I will convey your good intentions to her." Princess Isabella of Denmark was not angry when she saw Kevin's unapproachable attitude. She sighed softly and said, "You still don't believe me. You don't believe my good intentions." At this point, she paused for a moment, slowly raised her arm, and asked, "Great Mr. Magician, may I ask you to dance?" Kevin was stunned by this eccentric young lady. Although Kevin didn't want to get too close to this beautiful young lady, according to etiquette, he couldn't refuse the invitation of a beauty. Thus, Kevin had no choice but to accept the invitation. Along with the melodious music, the two of them danced under the countless, astonished gazes of the surrounding people. To be honest, after being trained by Her Highness and Countess Melise, Kevin could definitely be called a court dance master. However, when this master thought of how much hardship he had suffered in order to practice this dance, he couldn't feel happy at all. Moreover, the person dancing with him now was such a strange big sister. Because of this, the expression on Kevin's face was never related to the word happy. Of course, the other reason for Kevin's agonizing wait for the end of the dance was that the beautiful lady kept asking him questions as she danced with him. What gift would Miss Fonte like? Where would Miss Fonte like to play? Where would Miss Fonte be now? And so on. Kevin really didn't know how to answer this young lady, so he could only use some vague answers to muddle his way out of this. He was really looking forward to the end of the dance. However, the musicians had obviously received a hint from this big sister. The dance was really long. After dancing for a while, Kevin's feet were a little sore. Princess Isabella of Denmark, I really can't dance anymore. Please allow me to take my leave for now, Kevin said. All right, there's a rather beautiful garden in the back. Let's rest there for a while. Princess Isabella of Denmark continued. After saying that, the young lady made a gesture, and the attendants who had been standing at the side hurriedly busied themselves. They used a large silver tray to carry a few cups of fine wine, a can of soft drink, and a few plates of delicate desserts. They went to the back garden to prepare. After everything was arranged, Princess Isabella of Denmark attentively brought Kevin to the garden. Seeing how intimate the two of them were, everyone was stunned. Did the sun rise from the west? This, big sister, how did she change her appearance? One of Princess Isabella of Denmark's knights said in surprise. So, big sister's interests are like this. Does this count as an old cow eating young grass? Monkey asked. You can ask big sister yourself if you have the guts, another guy interrupted. However, I really admire that little guy. He really has the ability to make big sister like this. Until today, this is the first time I've seen big sister like this, Monkey said with emotion. Ignoring the discussions in the banquet pavilion, Kevin, accompanied by Princess Isabella of Denmark, came to the small garden in the back. Perhaps because it was in the south, the plants here grew especially vigorously. The lawn on the ground was green, like a gorgeous velvet carpet. 2 or 3 canna trees swayed their wide leaves, revealing bright and large flowers. Green vines crawled all over the flower racks, covering up everything that wasn't natural. This place was full of natural vitality, and there weren't many traces of artificial carvings. Kevin had always been interested in this kind of layout. The two of them leisurely wandered in this beautiful and tranquil garden. The other people had already tactfully retreated. Princess Isabella of Denmark picked up the can of drink on the silver tray and gently poured it into a glass. She then handed the glass to Kevin, looking like a gentle and virtuous hostess. One couldn't tell she was a pervert in Karth at all. To be honest, Kevin had always been curious about Princess Isabella. He didn't know why, but he always felt that there were 2 completely different faces hidden behind this young lady. One was a graceful countess who played around with life. She was omnipotent, audacious, shameless, and eccentric. What was the other face like? Was she as gentle and considerate as she was now? Chapter 235. While Princess Isabella of Denmark was staring at him, she was also staring at him. It made the young apprentice feel a little uncomfortable. Princess Isabella of Denmark, what is your relationship with His Majesty? Kelvin asked. He wasn't particularly interested in the topic, but if he didn't find something to talk about, the young lady would start asking questions about Fonte again. It worked. Princess Isabella of Denmark didn't expect someone to ask her such a question. She hadn't even thought about it before. So she frowned and thought for a while before replying, What relationship your Fonte has with Hugesson is what relationship I have with His Majesty. Princess Isabella of Denmark smiled at the awkward look on Kelvin's face. Of course, there's some differences. If His Majesty asks for my hand in marriage, I will definitely say yes. His Majesty and my brother need a marriage alliance. As for myself, it doesn't matter whether I get married or not. Princess Isabella of Denmark smiled at the confused look on Kelvin's face. You still don't know how romantic Karth is? In Karth, the right to pursue love doesn't come with marriage. As long as it's not made public, the couple will keep quiet about it. That's why a lot of girls who didn't manage to woo a girl before, if they continue to pursue her after marriage, they'll eventually succeed. Princess Isabella of Denmark smiled at Kelvin. I know it's hard for you Sophians to understand, but in Karth, it's normal. Marriage and love are two completely different things. Take you and Fontaine, for example. Even if that big pervert Huggison wins in the end and marries her, you can still interact with her in secret. Huggison doesn't have the right to stop you. Then why are the two of you fighting so hard over her? Kelvin couldn't help but ask. He regretted it as soon as the words left his mouth. Huggison fell in love with your little lover, so it's only natural that he would want to marry her. She's an excellent girl, and I'm deeply in love with her. If I win, Huggison won't have the face to marry her. So if you're worried about your little lover, why don't you give her to me? If you're worried about losing out, we can trade. What do you think? Princess Isabella of Denmark slowly leaned in and gently pressed herself against Kelvin's back. Her full breasts were gently rubbing against his shoulder. This erotic scene made the young magic apprentice's head swell with blood. Kevin couldn't help but think of the scene in the small living room on the day of the Victory Day Memorial. Although that time was quite embarrassing for him, it was undeniable that the experience was indeed exciting. Every time he thought of it, Kevin still had an indescribable feeling. Now that he had received such treatment again, Kevin was really reluctant to leave. Therefore, he did not reject Princess Isabella's attentive service and continued to ask, "Then, what about your brother? I think he's right." "Yes. Interesting. Aren't you going to help your brother?" Princess Isabella of Denmark picked up a delicate pastry and gently put it into Kelvin's mouth. "My brother is different from Huggison. He doesn't like anyone. He only likes himself. He only admires your little lover. He'll marry her and slowly admire her. But if you can reconcile with him, maybe he'll let her go. My brother is a very realistic person. If you're willing, I can be your matchmaker. I'm also very realistic." As she spoke, Princess Isabella's delicate lips moved to Kevin's ear. Her soft and fragrant tongue gently licked Kevin's earlobe, causing him to have wild thoughts. Kevin couldn't help but have an impulse to hug this beautiful and moving big sister tightly in his arms. However, although he thought about it, he didn't dare to really do it. This was the future queen of Karth. Therefore, Kevin struggled out of Princess Isabella's arms and asked, "If you mess around with me like this, how will you explain it to His Majesty in the future?" Princess Isabella of Denmark looked at Kelvin. She knew what the sovereign boy was getting at. She smiled. What's wrong with that? Back in the day, His Majesty, my brother, Huggison, myself, and a few others got together and went crazy for a while. It's not like His Majesty doesn't know that. Besides, who in Karth cares about that? Not to mention before marriage. We can even maintain an intimate relationship after marriage. If you want, you can be my only male lover. I can teach you a lot of things. As long as you are willing, no matter how my identity changes, you can always be my good lover. What do you think? Princess Isabella of Denmark's straightforward answer left Kelvin at a loss for what to do. He jumped to his feet and tried to keep as much distance as possible. Princess Isabella of Denmark, my relationship with Lady Fontaine isn't what you think it is. I can't trade her for anything. Besides, I'm still too young. I'll have to wait until I'm older to find a lover. With that, Kelvin fled again. Princess Isabella of Denmark was very attractive to Kelvin, and it was a very comfortable feeling. But the thought of how things would turn out in the future stopped him. After all, he wasn't a playboy like Huggison. What's the point of teasing him? A thick cloud of smoke rose from the ground. When it dissipated, Princess Isabella of Denmark was standing in front of her. She wasn't surprised at all. Didn't her brother have a mysterious magus by his side? Chapter 236. Anna, who had lost her left arm, and King Gravel returned to Gorgon. There was not much to celebrate after this expedition. Lord Tyran also led his men back to Blackstone Castle, but he still could not find his son Joe. The armistice agreement between the Empire and the Kingdom of Northland had officially come into effect. At least for a long time, there would not be any more wars. With the end of this war, both sides did not want to come into contact with each other again. Both sides had to focus on their own development. Lord Horf brought his eldest son Patrick, who had died gloriously in battle, and his second son Ackerman, who had become a berserker, back to Gorgon with the main forces of the Northland. There were too many unspeakable difficulties in this war, and too many unwillingness to accept defeat. However, the sun still rose as usual, and the people had new things to do. My lord, is it really worth it for us to go through so much trouble? Standing on the tattered deck, a sailor squinted his eyes under the scorching sun as he stood beside a half-naked man and complained helplessly. It doesn't matter if it's worth it or not. This is our mission, so we must complete this mission. The half-naked man grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. The ship under their feet was originally a sailing warship made by the German Empire. It was equipped with 2 large ballistas, and its speed was quite good. After it was built, it served as a coastal unit of the German Empire's navy, responsible for patrol and security. Later, because of the war, the 2 ballistas on it were damaged, and the ship lost its ability to fight. In addition, because of the aging of the hull, its speed had decreased a lot, so it was sent out as a fishing boat to catch some sea creatures. It became an armed fishing boat. What was even more sad was that Byron Bay had developed into a large port. Now, more advanced fishing boats could be produced here, and there were trade products such as sea salt, so these few broken ships became idle. Because there was no need to prepare for any naval battle in a short period of time, there were 20 outdated but still powerful magic crystal cannons on the turrets outside the port as cover. Therefore, the Northland Navy's need for warships became very low. Therefore, the Northland Navy was faced with a reality that made them not know whether to laugh or cry. They had become the most useless people. In the current Byron Bay, the new fishing boats were faster than the broken warships of the Navy. During the most painful days, the Marines docked in the port had to watch dozens of new fishing boats sail out of the port every day. The feeling was really sour. In the end, with the crazy idea of recycling waste, Princess Isabella of Denmark personally led 3 old naval warships out to sea after coaxing and pestering, heading south to search for the Elven Kingdom. It took them 2 months, and they even lost a warship along the way. Finally, they landed at the southern port of Ultramara. Although a ship sank along the way, they still managed to reach the Elf Kingdom. After all, they had to avoid the interception of the German Empire's navy along the way, and they had to overcome the bad weather and unfavorable sea conditions. It was already a very great thing that they could return to Byron Bay alive. Look, the Northland flag on the starboard side. A sailor leaned on the broken railing of the ship, pointing at the distant sea and shouting loudly. His words attracted the attention of many sailors. Everyone leaned on the railing and looked in the direction he was pointing. There, on a huge ship pulling a fishing net, the black flag of the Golden Eagle King was fluttering in the sea breeze. It was probably a new ship with a new design, because compared to the old fishing boats, it was obviously bigger. Raise the signal flag and greet our compatriots. Isabella held the wheel with one hand, her face filled with a smile of relief. Today, they finally saw their compatriots after going through so many hardships and dangers along the way. A red flag and a blue flag were raised together. Because they had drifted on the sea for too long, the 2 triangular flags were a little dirty and a little tattered. However, they were still raised at the top of the flagpole, fluttering in the wind. Soon, the opposite ship also raised 2 flags. The blue flag was on top, and the yellow flag was below. Just like the red and blue flag, which represented friendliness, the blue and yellow flag represented welcome. The officers and men of the Navy let out an ecstatic cheer. Behind them, there were also faint cheers coming from another old battleship. After a morning, The two old warships finally saw the kingdom of Northland's Byron Bay fort. They saw the cannons covered by canvas. Finally, we're home. After turning the wheel and adjusting their course, Isabella let out a long breath and hummed a song. Her voice drifted over the sea, and the sailors beside her hummed along. They missed their home so much, and missed this Byron Bay that they hadn't seen for more than 2 months. All the soldiers followed the tune and sang a familiar melody. Amidst the familiar melody, they leaned against the new straight pier in the harbor. Princess Isabella of Denmark, welcome back. Did the journey go smoothly? The officer, who had been waiting at the dock, saw Isabella jump down from the deck and saluted her. We lost dozens of sailors and soldiers, and a ship sank. Other than that, it was quite smooth. Isabella returned the salute and said, we found a route and established a friendship with the Elven Kingdom. Elves? That's something that everyone is paying attention to. When he heard the word elves, the officer couldn't care less about his comrades who had sacrificed themselves on the way. He immediately said, you should come and see this. It was built before you left, but it wasn't as big as it is now. New warships? Hearing this, Isabella's eyes lit up. She pushed the officer in front of her aside and walked quickly to the pier. Then, her gaze gradually bypassed a huge cargo ship and saw 3 beautiful new warships behind it. The appearance of these 3 new ships is much larger than the old battleships of the Navy. What's more exciting is that each of these ships has a huge sail and many masts. At a glance, one can tell that their speed is extremely fast. They can travel at a super fast speed of 30 kilometers per hour when the wind is blowing. The officer behind lawns introduced the new warships with a look of pride on his face. The new hull design, 2 at the front and 2 at the back, 8 on each side of the ship, a total of 20 magic crystal cannons with sufficient ammunition. These 3 warships can sink a fleet. Chapter 237. It's so beautiful. I really want to drive these battleships out immediately. This time, we won't have to take the long route, and we won't have to hide from Delman's battleships. We'll just kill our way through. Isabella said loudly. We'll definitely be faster than before. You'll also be able to transport more than before. The port officer pointed at the huge cargo ship that blocked their view and said, wait for another 2 days. There will be 2 more such cargo ships in the water. His Majesty's orders are to use all of them for long-distance voyages. We're going to bring gold to the south. Isabella, who couldn't wait any longer, turned around and looked at the port officer. I think we could just rob them this time. No, we're only going to bring some gold this time. We're going to bring all kinds of products for the remaining cabins. In short, we're going to carry everything that's popular to the Elven Kingdom, the port officer replied with a smile. Then, we'll only buy what we need and bring it back. If they dare to raise the price again, we'll bring it back. Isabella looked at the open cannons on the new battleships and the black cannons that poked out from the cannons with an expectant look on her face. Then we'll be able to save money, won't we? Hearing Isabella's words, the port officer smiled. Although the sea route was a strategic resource transportation route that was very important, King Gravel could only let his naval officers and soldiers sail the wind-powered sailboats in battle. It wasn't that his technology wasn't good enough to build steel battleships, but that he really didn't have that many resources to use. Steel was no longer a scarce resource. It had become a strategically scarce resource that needed to be strictly controlled. Not to mention building battleships for the Navy. Even equipping the Navy with 30 large magic crystal cannons was a difficult task. After these battleships were equipped with the magic crystal cannons, they would have to be tested in actual combat to see how powerful they were. The Kingdom of Northland wasn't in the mood to test the strength of their navy yet. They were frantically expanding their ground forces. Actual combat was the best way to test the capabilities of an army. After going through the test of war, the higher-ups of the Kingdom of Northland had realized that they were vulnerable when faced with the attacks of the German Empire's artillery. Therefore, increasing the proportion of heavy weapons in the army became the top priority of Northland's military reform. Under this order, all the craftsmen in Northland started producing at full speed and pushed the magical crystal cannons out of the production workshop one after another. If this isn't enough to conquer the German Empire, then let's see how far those damn bastards from the German Empire are going to expand this war, King Gravel said thoughtfully as he pulled on the reins of his warhorse. At this moment, in the wilderness of Northland, a giant steel beast let out a long cry. The airship was carrying 2 full ships of supplies, as well as sea salt and other industrial product from Byron Bay. As it flew over the wilderness, the civilians below stopped working and looked curiously at this scene that they had never seen before. That thing is called an airship. It's so fast that it's scary. A farmer waved the hoe in his hand, showing off his extensive knowledge to his fellow countrymen. In fact, he didn't know why the airship was moving, nor did he know how many goods were in it. However, in terms of size, this thing called an airship was already a very shocking new thing. This airship only took half a day to travel from Byron Bay to Gorgon. It's so big, it's so loud, it must be able to transport a lot of things. Hearing the farmer beside him showing off, the ordinary farmer nodded and praised. That's right, I heard that with this thing. We only need a day to go to Gorgon in the future. The farmer who was the first to show off said, without looking up, "This year's harvest is much better than last year's. I heard that the price of food has risen again." The farmers who no longer cared about the airship started to talk about issues that they were more concerned about. Anyway, for them, no matter how fast the airship was, it was not as good as the price of food. Food was the foundation of a country. Now, trade with the Kuruk Kingdom was still going on, but without the previous profits, the relationship between the two countries had become a little tense. King Gravel realized that the other side took the initiative to negotiate for peace to protect the German Empire. If the border between the two countries was not fixed, the war would not end. With the fighting power of the Kingdom of Northland, as long as they prepared for the winter, they could possibly swallow the entire German Empire in one go next year. However, if the two sides delineated the border, the Kingdom of Northland would have to find another reason to go to war again. Although the Kingdom of Northland did not find any reason to go to war this time, King Gravel still felt a little embarrassed to start wars again and again for no reason. King Gravel still had his own awareness. He knew what he was good at and what he was not good at. I don't know if Isabella has any decent gains on her side. Allies are really important strategic resources for us, Gravel said worriedly. This time, Isabella took the route that she had taken before on her journey south. Moreover, it was different from the last time. This time, they were bringing new ships. King Gravel was full of confidence. 3 new sailing warships, 3 transport ships. I think, with the broken ships of the German Empire, they will not be a threat to Isabella. But after that, he ordered the official in charge of this project. No matter what, continue to build more transport ships. Even sailing ships will do. We need resources too much, so we have to buy a lot of them. Even if we can't use them all up, it will still be good. The shipyard at Byron Bay is already building ships at full capacity, the official replied helplessly. But we lack enough sailors, and we don't have that many in-use cannons for the Navy. We don't need a fully equipped warship. Each warship can only be equipped with 4 cannons. Just 2 cannons at the front and back will be enough. The remaining space will be used for transport. It can be considered half a warship during war, and it will be used for transport. King Gravel directly brought up the concept of armed merchant ships. King Gravel's idea made everyone's eyes light up. This was indeed a solution that could not be helped. Chapter 238. In the scorching summer, the air was filled with the faint smell of sea salt. On the seaside of Byron Bay, more than a dozen huge installations that had never been seen before were showing off their terrifying abilities. Squeak! Accompanied by the sound of the engine, the steel cables were pulled straight, and then huge concrete bricks were hoisted up and thrown into the bay. With the work of these machines, a brand new dock was about to be built. The efficiency of the work had never been as dazzling as it was today. It was the first time that the mortal kingdom had developed so rapidly. Yesterday, it was still a quiet bay, but today, It had become a huge construction site. After surveying, it was found to be a very good port. The Kingdom of Northland was ready to build a huge port in Byron Bay to support its increasingly large sea transportation. After all, in terms of transportation capacity, sea transportation was still the cheapest way of transportation. I think that when Princess Isabella of Denmark comes back, she will be shocked by what she sees. Standing on the new dock, the Northland official proudly showed off to the engineers around him. He did have the capital to show off. 10 days ago, this was just an ordinary harbor, but now it was a brand new harbor that was even larger than the old one in Byron Bay. When the harbor was built, the installation of the hoisting equipment was considered, and more advanced channels were planned. In a few docks that had just been built and hadn't even been equipped with sheds, hundreds of boatmen were working hard. They were assembling the best wood according to the blueprints and turning it into a qualified giant ship. These giant ships were assembled according to a template, and every step was strictly determined according to the standards. These large ships could carry a considerable amount of supplies at a time. The purpose of their creation was to go to the south to buy enough supplies to meet the increasing demand for supplies. Almost every corner of the Kingdom of Northland began to have a demand for supplies. Large machinery required supplies. Each of these huge super ships was a transport giant. They could be said to be the largest ships made by mortals in the world. Their speed was comparable to that of a traditional warship. In charge of covering these new ships were the new warships built in the old port of Byron Bay. Most of these warships were cargo cabins. Rather than calling them warships, it was better to call them armed smugglers that were once popular on Earth. They were equipped with the lowest firepower configuration and were cheap. All they needed was cheap canvas and wood. Because they did not take up too many resources, they became the Kingdom of Northland's first choice of sea routes. The next time Isabella returned, she would be able to see a truly huge fleet. As there was no need for so many cannons, these sailboats, which were called frigates, have been manufactured as many as 10 of them. Together with the 3 real battleships in Isabella's hands, he would have a powerful fleet. The only mission of this fleet was to protect the transport fleet and purchase a large amount of resources from the Elven Kingdom. Of course, there was also another mission, to make the Elven Kingdom realize the gap between them and the Kingdom of Northland. They had to sell their resources to the Kingdom of Northland honestly and not play any tricks. Compared to the escort mission, Isabella seemed to prefer this side mission. This time, he had brought enough ammunition. The coastal areas of the Elf Kingdom and Empire were going to be in trouble. We're going to build 5 new docks, and they're actually going to be steel warships. The municipal officer exhaled and sighed. I'm already 50 years old this year, and I've never heard of an ironclad warship in my life. He looked at his subordinates and said word by word, "My biggest wish in life was to make Byron Bay prosperous. Every morning, there would be more than 10 fishing boats lined up to go fishing. I thought that was the most beautiful scenery in the world." That day, someone came to tell me that we had received the first sum of money and could build a new large fishing boat. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't until I saw the boatmen starting work and saw the wood being sent to the docks that I knew that it was all true. There was a faint smile on his face as he talked about the past. You don't understand. Before that day, I always thought that the so-called family of the Kingdom of Northland was the same as Byman. Byron Bay just had a new owner, and it was still the same. Those memories of the past seemed to be right in front of his eyes. The hardships of that time were still fresh in his mind, but then good days began to come, just like everything in front of him now. There were construction sites everywhere, and there were busy figures everywhere. There were happy people everywhere, and there were cheers of victory everywhere. But after that day, I knew that I was wrong. A salt pan was opened in Byron Bay, and it began to become prosperous. We built one fishing boat after another, and each one was better and bigger than the previous one. When he talked about this, the old municipal officer smiled. He remembered that he stood at the docks every morning and looked forward to it. It was as if all these things had happened yesterday. At that time, he was no longer young, but he still hoped for a miracle to happen, to save his hometown from hunger and despair. Later, his wish came true. It was sudden and real. During that time, I stood at the docks every morning and watched as 10 fishing boats lined up to go out to sea. Later on, I watched as the 20 fishing boats left in a grandiose manner. Later on, I watched as the endless white sails blocked my view. Now, I don't go to the docks anymore because I know that I don't need to. Thinking of this, he smiled at his assistant and sighed. Who would have thought? The kingdom of Northland is different. It can turn Byron Bay into a paradise on earth. Our seafood can be sent to the castle by train, and our dried fish can be sold to the vast sea. Our sea salt is an essential living resource for the Kuruth kingdom, and the seafood we produce is His Majesty's favorite dinner. We can have so many warships and dozens of transport ships. As he spoke, he looked at the distant horizon and looked at the white sails there. He had never seen other famous port cities, but in his opinion, even the largest port city in the Elven Kingdom and Empire could not compare to Byron Bay at this moment. Come back a year later, I promise you will have more feelings. A young man standing beside him smiled and comforted him. Our future will be better. That's what His Majesty said. Chapter 239. The old consul nodded and agreed with his subordinate's words. Yes, right now, we are no longer satisfied with defeating our enemies. The only thing we want to surpass is ourselves. We want to build steel warships and sweep away all our enemies at sea. He was still looking at the sea. My wife and children ate a full meal for the first time in their lives under the rule of the Kingdom of Northland. This made me feel extremely satisfied as a husband. Later on, our lives became better and better. Until now, we have delicious dinners every day. Our children can go to school, and my wife can do the housework at ease at home. When an old man was immersed in his memories, he always liked to talk. Whenever something happened, everyone would be amazed at the terrifying speed of development of the Kingdom of Northland. Not only the old people, but the young people also could not believe that the new world they lived in every day was the world they lived in. The old consul looked away from the sea. When I saw the first fishing boat being pushed into the sea and the mast swaying among the seabirds, I thought of myself as a citizen of the Kingdom of Northland for the first time. I felt that I should dedicate my life to the Kingdom of Northland. For this fishing boat, I am willing to sell my life to His Majesty. His tones suddenly became firm as he said word by word, Look at everything in front of you. This is heaven. Everyone I know is willing to die for His Majesty. Even if a dragon descends from the sky and burns everyone to death, I am willing to stand in front of His Majesty. Before I turn into ashes, no one can hurt His Majesty. In fact, his words represented the hearts of countless people in the Kingdom of Northland. People were willing to fight for the Kingdom of Northland. After experiencing exploitation and oppression, they cherished the happiness and freedom in front of them. After being oppressed for thousands of years, the mortals finally experienced what it was like to be a human standing up. They were not willing to kneel down again, even if it meant sacrificing their lives for it. They would rather die than let their descendants return to the darkness they had experienced. Amidst the old consul's stubborn tone, the fluttering sea breeze, and the cloudless blue sky, everything seemed to be responding to his belief. After a long time, Isabella led the fleet back. Clang! The heavy castle gate was pushed open from the outside. Isabella walked into the dimly lit hall with a gloomy face. There were guards behind her, and the sound of armor clashing against each other in the spacious hall was even more obvious. Father, the Elven Kingdom has gone too far. A pleasant voice echoed in the hall. The flames swayed with the breeze blowing in from the door, illuminating the golden throne and the middle-aged man sitting on it. Isabella, my dear darling, how about this time? The man sitting on the throne had a faint smile on his face as he asked softly, Father, the Elven Kingdom should at least give us an explanation this time, right? Isabella gnashed her teeth in hatred when she mentioned this matter. She investigated along the way, and all she saw were tragedies in the human world. What kind of explanation? We are mortals, Isabella. The strong don't need to give any explanation to the weak. King Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland leaned on his throne and said to his daughter. A trace of unwillingness flashed across Isabella's face, and she paused. That's right. After you left, I received news from another direction. Gravel nodded and said to his daughter, Let's just forget about this matter. After hearing this news, Princess Isabella of Denmark was stunned for a moment. Then, her beautiful eyes widened as she looked at her father. That's impossible. At this point, she paused. The people of the Empire seemed to be up to something recently. How? How is this possible? Isabella held onto the sword at her waist and subconsciously staggered a step. She frowned and pondered for a few seconds before looking up at Gravel. Is there any other news that I don't know? She asked Gravel, who was sitting on the throne. There's too much news that you don't know. For example, the Kingdom of Haruz declared war on the German Empire. They took down all the border castles without shedding a drop of blood and captured Ricketing Castle in one go. I know that. Isabella replied with some disapproval. When this news reached the Kingdom of Northland, Isabella was still in Byron Bay in the Northland. Of course, she heard about this war. At that time, she was still worried that the Empire would tear the fish apart. At that time, the Northland was also prepared for war. Tens of thousands of elite troops had already been sent to the border area to prevent the German Empire from suddenly changing their target and attacking the Kingdom of Northland. However, the crisis was resolved soon after. On one hand, from a strategic point of view, the Kingdom of Northland would not provoke the Kingdom of Northland after establishing a strong enemy like the German. On the other hand, the news that the German Empire's main forces continued to move south was confirmed. Therefore, the Northland side could finally breathe a sigh of relief. At the very beginning, when the main forces of the German Empire continued to move south, King Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland had considered the possibility of sneak attacking Blackstone Castle to take advantage of the situation. But in the end, this plan was put on hold because of insufficient preparation. The Kingdom of Northland missed the best opportunity, or rather, escaped a disaster, and was still at peace with their neighbor, the German Empire, until today. And according to intelligence, the enemy's casualties were very low, almost negligible. King Gravel ignored his daughter's words and continued. What? The Kingdom of Haruz, with less than 100,000 people, actually managed to conquer so many places in one go? Hearing this news, Isabella was a little uneasy. She also learned all kinds of commanding tactics. Of course, she knew how difficult it was to attack so many large cities in one go. If they were not careful, they would be caught in a dilemma. The casualties of the troops would be high, and the war would be protracted. In the end, because of the heavy cost, it would lead to the collapse of a powerful country. In the past, sieges often evolved into a country's nightmare, but now it was different. The siege of the Kingdom of Haruz seemed to be very easy. Not to mention the short time it took, even the casualties were pitifully low. This made Isabella a little uneasy. Could it be that the Kingdom of Haruz had some new weapons of war? Such a thought vaguely emerged in her heart. Not only that, an unknown general defeated tens of thousands of troops commanded by the Lord of Ricketing Castle. As if deliberately teasing his daughter, His Majesty the King of Northland said another piece of shocking news. Chapter 240. Hearing that they were going south to make money, many of the officials' expressions became much better. They had indeed reaped unprecedented benefits in the south. The rich resources in the south had indeed made everyone go wild with joy. The Elven Kingdom had many minerals, gemstone mines, and many other precious minerals. What made the Kingdom of Northland even more ecstatic was the discovery of magic crystals, and the reserves were quite large. If the land and other benefits were taken into account, the Kingdom of Northland's troops in the south had made a lot of money in the Elven Kingdom, and many other troops were very envious. Because of the discovery of magic crystals, our wealth has increased by a lot. An official nodded with satisfaction and agreed with the official in charge of finance. I suggest that we continue to advance north and attack the German Empire after fully occupying the Elven Kingdom. A minister in charge of finance stood up and suggested, increase the number of troops by 50,000. Take over the German Empire. Agreed. We should subsidize the war in the north. At least we should put some of our attention on the various countries in the south. That's also a war zone, isn't it? Another minister said as he looked at the Lord beside him, expanding the war is not beneficial to us. Gentlemen, don't just look at the benefits in front of you. Destruction is always easier than construction. We have taken over so many places, so we have to build them up. Do you think this is a good thing? King Gravel finally spoke and interrupted everyone's argument. I know that everyone wants to quickly obtain benefits in the south, and I want to do so too. But we can't be impatient. We have to be steady and win. Once we have taken over a place, we have to establish a firm foothold there. He slowly spoke and emphasized to everyone, choose qualified officials, manage the Elven Kingdom well, and turn it into our granary. This is what we should do now. As for continuing to the south, we can discuss this another day. What we need to think about now is what the war will be like in the future. King Gravel stood up and walked to the map behind him with a serious expression. The latest news is that the German Empire is even more scattered. He tapped on a map and looked at everyone's faces. Previously, we wanted to use a decisive battle to eliminate our opponents. This kind of large-scale battle is actually advantageous to us. We're good at fighting in groups. That's our advantage. His words were a bit cold, making all of the officials who were passionately discussing the attack to the south involuntarily swallow a mouthful of saliva. Someone took out a handkerchief from his bosom and wiped the sweat on his forehead with trembling hands. They had been too complacent just now. All they could think about was how they and the corporations they represented were going to make money. But they had forgotten that this was the Kingdom of Northland. Whether it was to make money or develop industry, everyone here had to rely on King Gravel's whims. Their strength was just a paper tiger, while King Gravel's strength was the true strength. In the Kingdom of Northland, His Majesty's words were absolute. If he gave the order to eradicate a family, the other ministers would carry out the Emperor's orders without even asking for the reason. This was the power of governance. This was the prestige of King Gravel in the Kingdom of Northland. Although he didn't often express his opinions and was sometimes hesitant, when he spoke, no one dared to question anything. King Gravel's hand drew a circle in the area where the battle took place yesterday. Previously, whether it was the German Empire or the Elven Kingdom, they all thought that they could defeat us in a direct battle. So our tactics were the same. We all gathered our forces, looked for the enemy's main force, and waited for an opportunity to fight. After that, he paused for a moment, then continued, but now, our enemies have realized their mistake. They don't dare to gather their forces because they're afraid of our destructive weapons. As a result, they may have found a new tactic to attack us. I call it guerrilla warfare. He walked to the side of the map. He pointed at the enemy troops near Belize and said, once they disperse and start harassing us with small groups, then use local conflicts to wear us down, we'll be in a very passive situation. If they infiltrate the area controlled by our army, or even deeper, and reach our core industrial area, then we'll have to pay a heavy price. After that, King Gravel looked at the others. Previously, they only targeted me and planned on how to assassinate me alone. If they thought about it and attacked the cities, then what would happen to us? Have you thought about it? King Gravel asked. After King Gravel's question, everyone suddenly realized that the invincible Kingdom of Northland did not become stronger when facing the enemy's attacks. Instead, they became weaker. Compared to 4 years ago, the Kingdom of Northland was now full of high-value targets. In the past, they could abandon half of their territory to continue fighting, but now it was unlikely that they would continue to fight. In the past, the strategic locations were only some castles and some cities. Even if it was a large city, it was very easy to rebuild. As long as there were enough people, these cities could be quickly restored. In such an era, losing a city was nothing more than losing some people and some minerals. For a vast empire, it was far from a serious injury. But now, such a good thing was gone forever. It had to be emphasized that everything had changed. The large cities of the Norland Kingdom required water and electricity supply, a powerful underground sewage treatment system, an expensive infrastructure that made people flinch. Now that they were attacking a city, as long as they blew up an important target, the lives of the people would become a mess. If the water source was destroyed, then the city would be paralyzed, and the people would lose the ability to live. The entire city would collapse in a few days. When that happened, the city would be smelly, and the countless toilets would become a big problem that was difficult to solve. The entire city had countless important facilities, including the largest docks and ports, and none of them could be abandoned. How could they guard against thieves for 1,000 days? In order to protect these important facilities, the Kingdom of Northland had worked very hard, but there would be more such facilities in the future. Chapter 241. Come to think of it, powerhouses who seemed to be invincible during peacetime could even threaten the lives of everyone around them during a war. The poisonous gas that they released could even spread dozens of kilometers away. Just by enveloping a village, it could wipe out everything that breathed in it. We didn't become stronger. We became weaker, gentlemen. King Gravel looked at his advisors and said slowly, "Do you think we've won? That we can choose which piece of meat to eat first? No, gentlemen. In fact, we are far from winning this war. We are even in danger of losing." Rulers would not easily use powerhouses because mature people had to consider the consequences of doing so. Frequently, using powerhouses would only make the enemy crazier and crazier. War was only a means to solve problems. Any rational person would try their best to avoid the path of mutual destruction. King Gravel was a ruler. What he had to think about was occupying as much land as possible and expanding his empire. He had to use the strong regardless of the cost, and turn every place into scorched earth. This was not a choice that a normal person would make. As cities were destroyed one by one, King Gravel might be the final victor of the war, but he would only get a world of ruins. As long as he won, it did not matter if the world was turned into ruins and wreckage. Just thinking about it made one realize how terrifying it was. Therefore, King Gravel did not really intend to use powerhouses to cleanse the world. We still have a tacit understanding now. As long as they don't attack our cities, we won't use strategic powerhouses. King Gravel looked at his subordinates and said his thoughts. But if they attack our cities and kill innocent civilians, I will order a nuclear counterattack. But if they don't attack our cities and assassinate our important members, then this tacit understanding cannot be broken. King Gravel ordered. So we can only think of other ways to deal with guerrilla warfare. These mages were much more powerful. They did not need to carry weapons and could even launch powerful attacks by themselves. To the Kingdom of Northland, they were truly terrifying. While King Gravel was reminding his ministers to guard against arrogance and rashness, and to carefully deal with the possible guerrilla warfare of the Elf Kingdom, Lord Tyran of the German Empire was anxiously watching his subordinates walk back and forth like ants on a hot pan. "What do you mean you can't contact him?" The enemy was less than half a day away from Blackstone Fort. I can already hear the sound of cannons outside the city. Where are the reinforcements I asked for? He shouted from the council hall of the city in a fit of rage. "Lord Consul, I don't know what happened either. We've lost contact with the Grand Consul. Everyone is looking for him. Without his orders, many troops cannot be mobilized. The troops that are supposed to support you are now stationed near Boheap, but they do not dare to approach us without further instructions." An officer standing beside him reported with a long sword in his hand. "Without his orders, many troops cannot be mobilized. The troops that are supposed to support you are now stationed near Boheap, but they do not dare to approach us without further instructions." What's going on? How am I supposed to stop the Kingdom of Northland without reinforcements? I'm about to be surrounded. Did he know? Did he know? Lord Tyran angrily grabbed the other party by the neck and questioned him loudly. He was ordered to defend Blackstone Fort, which was almost the last line of defense of the German Empire. However, under such circumstances, the Grand Consul who started the war without permission and dragged the German Empire into the abyss had disappeared. Blackstone Fort was still in ruins, and the reconstruction work was going to be very difficult. The explosion had cut off their escape route, which was equivalent to being surrounded, and they were still struggling bitterly. Under such circumstances, the leader had disappeared, and what was left behind was only chaos. The Kingdom of Northland has broken through to the north. Our defenses in the north are collapsing, an officer said gloomily as he looked at the map hanging in the city hall. The reinforcements of the Empire did not stop the advance of the Kingdom of Northland. The army was attacking Blackstone Fort, which proved that the German Empire did not stop the enemy's advance at all. Another army was going around the mountains to the south. Once they reached their position, Blackstone Fort would be surrounded. At this point, it was still unknown who would stop the other army of the Kingdom of Northland. Find him. Get him to mobilize the troops as soon as possible. If this continues, the German Empire will be finished. As the consul of Blackstone Fort, Lord Tyran was in charge of the battle command of the entire war zone. He could feel that his troops were collapsing, so he wanted to know the next step of the Grand Consul's plan. Whether it was giving up on Blackstone Fort and continuing to retreat, or defending Blackstone Fort to the death, the hundreds of thousands of troops of the German Empire had to have a goal, right? The previous order was to defend Blackstone Fort and prevent the Kingdom of Northland from breaking through the central region. However, this order had been carried out for more than 10 days, and the encirclement was getting smaller and smaller. Blackstone Fort was about to fall. As the Grand Consul of the German Empire, he should at least say something, right? We're finished. How many days has it been since the reinforcements arrived? Tell me, how many days has it been? He grabbed an officer beside him and questioned him loudly. Probably it hasn't been here for 2 days. The officer thought for a while in a panic before giving a rough answer. It seemed that the Empire's troops had not appeared at the rear since yesterday. The soldiers who had been sent to the defensive line were still fighting, but the reinforcements were nowhere to be seen. They're also running out of reinforcements. They don't have any more soldiers left. What should we do? What should we do? Lord Tai Luen smiled bitterly in despair. He walked back to his chair and sat down. He looked up at the sky and sighed. The German Empire obviously could not fight the Kingdom of Northland in a war of attrition. They could only rely on the Empire's troops to barely fight. However, now that the reinforcements were gone, and the troops were all lost in a few days, what could he use to stop the Kingdom of Northland's attack? Thinking of this, he stood up excitedly again and ordered loudly. Asked them if they found the Grand Consul. Did they find him? Then, he interrupted his order and said to himself, "It's useless. Let the Empire's knights ask him personally. Go find him." "But Lord Consul, we can't do it," the officer beside him reminded him softly. Chapter 242. In this era of materialism, sometimes it was hard to tell the difference between the real and the fake. It was unknown whether it was Zhuangzhou dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of Zhuangzhou. The protagonist of this fantasy story was called Li Xuefei. He was 26 years old and was now working in a Cantonese restaurant in Sydney. After graduating from university, he came to Australia to work and travel as a backpacker through a work holiday visa. Li Xuefei found it hard to adapt to life in this unfamiliar foreign city for a while. Fortunately, he had help along the way, so he barely managed to gain a foothold in this foreign country. The place where he worked was a shopping mall next to a local university. There was a large chain of Cantonese restaurants owned by Malaysians. Every day, he came to work like a machine, 10 hours a day, 50 hours a week. It was a little better than in China. After all, the salary was high enough and there was food. It was very expensive to eat Chinese food overseas. Li Xuefei had never done such work before, but he had learned a few months of cooking skills training, so he could only start as a small worker. This small worker was also called a kitchen helper. On this day, after clocking in, Li Xuefei started a busy and tense day of work as usual. Because this restaurant was delivered by the central kitchen, Li Shuifei only needed to do some simple processing and was responsible for frying and other chores. You have to be fast today. The person who spoke was none other than Li Shuifei's immediate superior, the boss in charge of cooking, and so on. Because the labor in this foreign restaurant was expensive, they often had multiple jobs. This boss was in her 40s. She was from Chongqing and later married to Hong Kong. Now she came to Australia to emigrate. She actually looked down on people from the mainland, although she was born in the mainland. Because I didn't speak Cantonese, Li Shuifei went to speak Cantonese with others after I finished speaking Mandarin. As for Li Shuifei, he worked for money anyway. No one knew him in a foreign country, so he didn't worry and wasn't afraid of losing face. This boss was called Andra. That's right. It was similar to Yang Tianbao, but there was no Bei Bei. Others called her Andra Bei Bei, but Li Shuifei never dared to call her that. There was no need for that. He just needed to do his job well. Her attitude towards others was very good, especially those who spoke Cantonese. Only to Li Shuifei, she was very strict. He didn't know if this was good or bad. She always said that Li Shuifei was slow at work and that she wouldn't be able to keep up with the pace at Christmas and would drag everyone down. Speaking of which, Australia had a weekly wage system. Salaries were paid on Thursdays, and malls were open until 9 o'clock from Thursdays to Sundays. This was too common in China. One had to know that in Australia, which was vast but sparsely populated, people felt that delaying until 9 o'clock was already very exciting. The foreigners didn't have the habit of saving money, so on Thursday, the restaurant was packed with people. They wanted to party after receiving their salary, as expected of foreigners. Christmas was even more terrifying. It was said that it was the busiest day of the year for the restaurant. There were so many sheets in the kitchen that they could cover the entire floor. Because Li Shuifei was a layman and was not born in Guangdong, it was extremely difficult for her to start this job. Fortunately, he still had some common sense as a chef. After all, the training was not for nothing, so there would not be any big trouble. That day, as usual, Li Shuifei worked until 9 o'clock in the evening. Li Shuifei dragged her tired body and began to prepare to close the file. Today's business was average because it was Wednesday after all. As usual, Li Shuifei put the leftover ingredients into the wind cabinet. The wind cabinet was a house, and there was a room inside that was a freezer. Li Shuifei wanted to get off work early and go home to sleep, so she hurriedly packed up and clocked out. However, halfway there, she suddenly remembered that she had forgotten to put the whole plate of marinated pork ribs into the freezer. If it stinks tomorrow, Andrew would scold her to death. Suddenly, she was not sleepy anymore. Fortunately, she did not get in the car. Li Shuifei rushed back to the mall. It was almost time to get off work. A fat Australian security guard was about to close the door when Li Shuifei ran back and happened to not close it. Li Shuifei explained to the security guard in broken English that she was an employee and had to put something in. The security guard did not seem to understand. Then, Li Shuifei wanted to go in and put something in before coming out, so she forced her way in. The security guard did not have a strong sense of responsibility. When he saw that the Asian guy went in, he did not pay much attention to it. When Li Shuifei entered the restaurant where she worked, the bosses had already gotten off work. Only Li Shuifei knew about the plate of pork ribs hidden under the cabinet. As expected, these bosses did not find it. Li Shuifei quickly put the pork ribs into the freezer room. When he opened it, he saw the wind cabinet room piled up slowly. Inside was the freezer room. Li Shuifei quickly put the plate of pork ribs into the freezer. There was almost no space to walk in the wind cabinet. Then, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Sometimes, fate was a wonderful thing. At this time, on the shelf near the door of the wind cabinet room, a few plates of tofu fell down and hit the door handle, locking it from the outside. At this time, Li Shuifei, who was about to turn around and go back, found that the freezer door was closed. This was a very common thing, but today, it was a little unusual. Li Shuifei pushed it, but did not move. Li Shuifei thought that he did not use enough strength, so he pushed it hard. It did not work. Something seemed to be wrong. It was so cold. Li Shuefei was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, but it was freezing in the freezer. He began to panic. He tried to smash and kick the door, but it was no use. Because of the vibration, a shelf full of things outside the door fell down. Now, Li Shuefei knew the seriousness of the problem. His body began to shiver from the cold. He took out his phone from his pocket and wanted to make a call. He did not have many friends in Australia and did not know the local police number. It seemed that he only had a colleague's phone number. Before he dialed, Li Shuefei found that there was no signal. At this moment, despair began to surge. Although he was ordinary, he was not so unlucky. It was getting colder and colder. Li Shuefei felt that he was going to fall asleep. At this moment, he felt a little warm. His parents, his fantasy girlfriend, Li Shuefei imagined the scene with them. The Australian security guard outside the mall came back and locked the door. He thought that the Asian guy had gone out. In this way, Li Shuefei gradually felt less uncomfortable. He felt that it was good. He closed his eyes. At this moment, no matter how much regret he felt, it was useless. He felt that, at this moment, he was relaxed and did not have any pressure. Suddenly, he felt a trace of cold fall on his face. He slowly opened his eyes. Where was this? Chapter 243. Li Shuefei looked at the white snow around him. He was on a road leading to the outskirts of a town. Li Shuefei saw that the person sitting opposite him was a strong man with blonde hair, wearing blue clothes and chainmail. Hey, you're finally awake. You're preparing to cross the border, right? But you were ambushed by the Empire, just like us, just like the thief over there. Li Shuefei found that although his English was not good enough, he could understand about 70% of what the other person said, and the other person was speaking English. Wait a minute. Why does this scene seem so familiar? Was this not the opening animation of the game Old Man Scrolls? Although Li Shuefei would read online novels and play pirated AAA works during his rest time. But it was really awkward to be transmigrated into a game world like this. Although those crappy online novels often involve people go to other worlds to open harems or special forces being reborn in other worlds, although it was silly, there were many people who read it. Everyone liked to read crappy things. But he did not expect that when it was his turn, he would be transmigrated because he could not get out of some freezer. Thinking of this, he thought that he was probably dead on Earth. In a foreign country, his colleague opened the freezer the next day and found an iceman. Thinking about it made him sad. He was a stinky loser who had never touched a girl, never been in a relationship, and never been filial to his parents. He was very worried. If his mother knew that he had died in a foreign country, how sad would that be? When he left home, his parents did not agree, saying why did he have to go out and find a job near home? He ignored their advice and said that the world was so big and he wanted to see it. In this strange Sydney, no one would shed a tear for his death. The news might report it, but he had died so quietly without a name, just to freeze a basin of pickled pork ribs that had fallen outside. Like a speck of dust, it could only make his loved ones cry, but it did not leave a trace in that world. Thinking of this, he felt inexplicably sad, and his tears could not stop flowing. Li Shuefei wanted to wipe his tears with his hands, but then he realized that he did not have any hands at all. His hands were tied behind his back, and he had snow-white hair on his body. It was one thing for him to transmigrate and die without a trace, but after he was reborn, he wasn't even a human. One had to know that this world was the real world of the old man scrolling bar that he played. However, he had no time to play the game after downloading it. Every time, he would have something to do after watching the opening animation for a few seconds. Therefore, he had no idea what would happen next, nor did he know what he had transmigrated into. At this time, Li Shuefei saw the situation around her clearly. It turned out that they were now sitting in a carriage as a group of prisoners being escorted. "Hello, my name is Larov," the strong blond man said to me when he saw my tears. "You damn storm capes, you've messed up the Horizon province. Isn't it nice to have a friendly and lazy kingdom?" The man beside the blond man said, "Hey, you and I, we shouldn't be here. The Empire only wants to capture those storm capes, he said to Li Shuefei. Actually, Li Shuefei could only hear the gist of it. For some reason, Li Shuefei could naturally understand some of it. We're brothers and sisters now. Thief, the man said mockingly. Shut up, the Imperial soldier in charge of driving the carriage said. Then what happened to him? The thief sneered back at the blond man. At the same time, he glanced at the other man in a black cloak whose mouth was tied with a piece of cloth. Watch your mouth. You're talking to Ulfric Storm Capes, the true supreme king, the blond man said sternly. Ulfric, aren't you the lord of Wind Helm City, the leader of the rebel army? But if you're captured by them, heavens, where are they taking us? The thief couldn't help but be shocked. He knew that something bad was about to happen. Li Shuefei was like an idiot. She looked at the unfamiliar world and the people around her. I don't know where we're going, but I know that the martyr's palace is calling for me, the blond man said in a helpless tone. No, that's impossible. It's completely impossible, said the thief. Li Shuefei could feel that he was starting to panic. Hey, where did you grow up, thief? Asked the blond man as he looked at the thief. What does that have to do with anything? Said the thief disdainfully. The last wish of the Nords is to return to one's roots, muttered the blond man. Those words struck Li Shuefei like a bolt of lightning. Return to one's roots? What was he? Lorist. I'm from Lorist, said the thief as he calmed down. The carriage rocked back and forth. There was another carriage in front of it with a group of soldiers dressed in blue and chainmail. Their attire was similar to Larev's. There were even some cavalry behind them. General Tullius, the executioner is waiting for you, said an Imperial soldier. All right, let's get to work, said Tullius. At that moment, the thief uttered a string of names that Li Shuefei didn't recognize. Was he praying to the gods? In front of them was the entrance of a small town that was guarded by many archers. As the carriage entered the town, Li Shuefei saw a general talking to an elf. That general should be Tullius. He was riding a huge horse and looked just like Emperor Julius Caesar from movies. The blond man seemed to be cursing at the two of them. The town was built on the side of a mountain. There were houses all around and commoners, both men and women, as well as children and the elderly, came to watch the show. Lavrov began to mock himself. He talked about the girls that he used to run to this place, and how he didn't know if a person that he knew was still making honey wine here. He also said that when he was young, he always felt that the city walls and sentry towers of the Empire were so secure and reassuring. At that moment, a young boy among the crowd asked his father what they were doing. His father didn't reply and instead ordered him to go back to his house. The child was disappointed and wanted to see the Stormcloak soldiers executed by the executioner, but he had no choice but to listen to his father. The Imperial carriage finally stopped at the edge of the plaza. Why did we stop? Asked the thief as he looked around anxiously. What do you think? We've arrived, said Larev as he looked down on the thief, and said that he couldn't let the gods wait for too long. Chapter 244. No, wait, we're not rebels, the horse thief shouted. He was very agitated. You're about to die. Have some backbone, Lavrov said, then jumped off the carriage. You should tell them the truth. This is a misunderstanding. The horse thief was scared. Those whose names are called stand by the guillotine. One by one, a female captain said. A female captain said. Her armor was much better than the dark red leather armor of the Imperial soldiers. She was wearing silver steel armor and an Imperial helmet. The Empire loves to make death lists, Lavrov said to himself. Li Shuefei felt that Lavrov was a chatterbox. Why couldn't he be quiet when he was about to die? Why couldn't he be like that bird lord? Li Shuefei didn't mind dying again. What if he traveled back in time this time? Ulfric Stormcloak, Lord of Wind Helm City. An Imperial soldier with short blonde hair shouted. He was holding a notebook. It's my honor, Lord Ulfric. Lavrov's attitude made him seem like he was going to die for a cause. Lavrov of Riverwood Town. The soldier called out the names according to the list. Like Ulfric, the chatterbox called Lavrov also walked to the guillotine. Although he looked very manly, Li Shuefei felt that he really talked a lot of crap. The horse thief was called. He said that he wasn't a rebel and that they couldn't do this. Soldiers from the Empire were everywhere, but the horse thief actually ran away on his own. "Stop!" A woman who looked like an Imperial military officer shouted. At this moment, a woman who looked like a military officer gave the order. The Imperial archers shot the idiotic horse thief to death with a single arrow. "Is there anyone else who wants to run?" The woman turned around and asked. At this moment, a man with short blonde hair who looked like an assistant to the Imperial military officer asked me to step forward. "This is a tiger man who came with the caravan. He's not on our list. How should we deal with him?" "You guys are always causing trouble," the Imperial military officer asked his superior. "What's your name, Tiger Man?" The man asked Li Shuefei. Li Shuefei thought to himself, "I was a complete loser in my previous life. I don't want to live like that anymore. I want to use a new name to announce that I've been reborn. My name is Snowfree." Li Shuefei decided to start a new life in this game world with the new name of Snowfree. Since heaven and earth were heartless and treated all living things like straw dogs, then why couldn't he play with life and torture the human world? From today onwards, there would no longer be Li Shuefei in the world. There would only be Snow, a cynical tiger man. In the end, the person who looked like a female officer told him not to worry about the list and to carry out quickly. "As you command, my captain." "Sorry, Tiger Man. We will ask someone to send your bones back to your hometown, Iswil." "Prisoners, follow the captain," said the Imperial soldier who looked like an assistant. Snowfree also followed. He didn't care about death now. Although he just wanted to live well in this game world, a basin of cold water was poured over him. "Some may call you a hero, Ulfric Stormcloak, but heroes don't kill kings and usurp the throne with a dragon's roar," General Turius of the Empire said to Ulfric. At this time, Ulfric's mouth was still bound, but he seemed to be mumbling something in his throat. "You started this war and plunged Horizon Province into chaos. Now, the Empire will exterminate you and restore peace to Horizon Province," Turius continued. At this time, the sound of a dragon's roar could be heard in the distance. The sky was still as blue as ever. "What's that sound?" asked an Imperial soldier beside him. "Nothing, continue." Turius looked indifferent. At the same time, he urged the executioners to get ready and carry out the execution quickly. "Yes, General Turius," replied the female Imperial captain flatteringly. There was also an Imperial priestess standing next to the execution platform. At this time, she began to raise her hands and recite her unknown prayer. Snowfree felt that this group of Imperial people was too hypocritical. They even made killing a person ritualistically. "When we praise your soul to Etheris, we pray to the 8 holy spirits above your head, for you are the salt and earth of our beloved name," the priestess recited. "What the hell? What were these things?" Snowfree heard a bunch of names in a daze. "Dear Taros above, all of you, shut up and do it quickly." A red-haired Stormcloak soldier cursed in disdain. He walked up to the guillotine below the tower, where the executioners were already ready. "As you wish." The priestess shut her mouth and stopped praying. "Hurry up. I don't have time to waste with you." The soldier laid down on the guillotine. Snowfree had seen people who were not afraid of death, but this person was even more fearless than himself. He was a little shocked. "My ancestors are welcoming me with open arms. Do you have any, Imperial people?" The man looked like he really wanted to die. The executioner raised his blade and brought it down. With a crack, the red-haired man's head fell into the wooden box in front of the guillotine. Some people in the crowd cursed the Imperial bastards, while others shouted for justice. "The Stormcloak must die." It was very lively. "Fear nothing in life, and your spirit lives on in death," Larav said. There was another dragon roar. Everyone looked into the distance. Snowfree didn't even need to think to know what was going to happen next. "It's coming again. Did you hear that?" At this time, the Imperial soldier with short blonde hair who was in charge of reading the list said to the female captain, "I said, bring the next prisoner up." The female captain's attitude was very impatient. "Go to the guillotine." "Prisoners, don't be nervous," the blonde Imperial soldier said. Snowfree walked forward and lay down on the guillotine. At this time, his head turned to the tower. A black dragon flapped its huge black wings and flew to the top of the tower. There was a huge black dragon on the top of the tower. Oh my God, this was the first time Snowfry saw a living black dragon at such a close distance. This was not a scene he could encounter every day. The black dragon lay on the top of the tower and let out a deafening dragon roar. Originally, the blue sky suddenly changed. The sky dimmed, the wind and clouds gathered, and actually rained fire. The executioner was a little shaken by the dragon's roar. All of this was seen by Snowfry. "Don't just stand there, kill that thing." Turius ordered. "Guards, move the residents to a safe place," he said again. Snowfry's vision was dark, and he had a splitting headache. At this time, he heard Larav say loudly, "Brothers, God will not give us a second chance." He called Snowfry, and they immediately rushed to the other end of the tower. Chapter 245. Without much hesitation, Snowfry followed Larav and ran desperately to another tower. After entering the tower, Lord Ulfric also ran there. "Lord Ulfric, what is that? Is the legend true?" Larav asked excitedly. "The legend doesn't raise a village to the ground." After taking off the cloth, binding his mouth, the Lord finally spoke. Snowfry saw the two idiots talking to themselves. Neither of them thought to untie him. "Run now!" Larav roared at Snowfry. "Run? Run to where? Why don't you run? Do you think I'm stupid?" A series of questions flooded Snowfry's mind. "Break through the tower, let's go." Larav continued. Fortunately, he told Snowfry where to go next, so he quickly rushed to the spiral staircase in the tower. "Wait, why did he ask me to take the lead?" Snowfry thought to himself and deliberately slowed down his pace. At that moment, the black dragon suddenly knocked down the wall of the tower in front of Snowfry and immediately spewed out a pile of dragon fire. Fortunately, today was Snowfry's lucky day. Snowfry really wanted to spray Larav to death with a mouthful of salt soda. Fortunately, he was quick-witted and hesitated. Otherwise, he would have lost his life. Even so, Snowfry still felt that his fur was a little burnt, and there was still some distance between them. If he was hit, he would have become a delicious roasted tiger meat. At that moment, Snowfry remembered the delicious food of his previous world and couldn't help but have an idea. Haha, bold idea. Snowfry used the gap created by the black dragon and jumped desperately to a hotel outside. The roof of the hotel was gone, and there were burning fires everywhere. People were running desperately. They never thought that such a terrible scene would befall them. At that moment, I met the Imperial soldier. He asked Snowfry to run with him. There were charred corpses everywhere. The Imperial archers were aiming at the black dragon and shooting. When they arrived at the entrance of a fortress, Lavrov was also there. The two of them had one door on each side. Both of them asked Snowfry to follow them, but Snowfry still chose to follow the Imperial soldier. He couldn't stand Lavrov's nagging. Finally entering the fortress, Snowfry felt that he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The crazy running had exhausted his stamina. However, with this tigerman's body, Snowfry felt that he had become much more agile. Is that really a dragon? The legendary messenger of the apocalypse. The golden-haired Imperial soldier sighed. "Hello, my name is Hadeva. Now that it's just the two of us, we should move on. Come here, and I'll cut off the rope that binds your hands," Hadeva said to Snowfry. The moment he cut the rope, the long-lost sense of freedom made Snowfry feel incomparably comfortable. "Let's look around and see if we can find anything that can treat burns and other useful things." Then, Hadeva went to the side to rest. This room should be the resting place of an Imperial soldier. There were 3 beds as soon as we entered the room. There was an elk's head on a stone pillar in the middle, and there was a big storage box at the foot of each bed. There were many torches on the wall, and there was an Imperial flag on the other wall. It was a flag with a red dragon on a black background. There was a small dining table next to it, and there were 4 gold coins on the table. There were also some bowls and skulls. There was also a book on the bookshelf called Mixed Troop Combat Strategy. I picked up the book, and only then did I notice that I was wearing a ring on my hand. The tiger claw with white fur was actually my hand. It can't be a space ring, right? Snowfry thought that he had read quite a lot of web novels. This kind of melodramatic plot and cheat were the necessities of a main character, although Snowfry wasn't sure if he was the main character. He tried it, and the book immediately disappeared. Then, he sensed a cuboid space that was more than 50 square meters in size. There were some other things in it, and the book appeared there too. As expected, it was a space ring. I could use it with just a thought. This was great. A stingy person like me loved to plunder. This space of 50 square meters was enough for me to plunder. He found an Imperial Light helmet, an Imperial Light armor, and 2 gold coins. Snowfry immediately changed into an Imperial Archer's outfit and changed out of the linen shirt he was wearing. There was also Alto and wine on the table. He took them all away. Hadeva watched Snowfry's performance, and his surprised expression was exaggerated. There was also an iron longsword. Snowfry decided to use this as his weapon for the time being. Then, seeing that Snowfry was ready, Hadeva pulled a mechanism and the door to the room opened. Just then, Snowfry saw that there was another door on the other side. It seemed that a storm-cloaked soldier was there. It seemed that a battle was inevitable. Hadeva signaled to Snowfry and pulled down the iron ring. The door opened just like that. There were 2 storm-cloaked soldiers outside the door. Hadeva rushed forward to fight them without saying a word. The 2 storm-cloaked soldiers held an iron axe and an iron warhammer. They were both two-handed weapons. Snowfry knew that he could not be touched. These things were very powerful. With his agility, Snowfry was very satisfied with this body. Snowfry and Hadeva worked together to kill the 2 storm-cloaked soldiers. This was a large hall. There was a large circular red carpet on the ground. There was also a table and 2 chairs in the hall. A female storm-cloaked soldier was sitting on one of the chairs. Looking at the engraved name tag on her soldier's name, her name should be Gongar. There were 3 corpses. Snowfry did not care if Hadeva was willing or not. He directly put everything on them into the space ring, and they became 3 naked corpses in an instant. Fortunately, Hadeva did not object. He just felt that they should leave this place as soon as possible. Then, Snowfry and Hadeva used the key to open the metal door on the other side. They entered the spiral staircase that led downwards. There was a wooden cart with a few cabbages on it. There were also a few bags with a few potatoes in them. The 2 of them walked down the dark spiral staircase and reached a corridor downstairs. Then, with a dragon's roar, the other side of the corridor collapsed. There was no other way. The 2 of them could only walk through a door in front of them. There was a candlestick in front of the door. After opening the door, the 2 of them entered a room with a warm fireplace. The first thing that caught their eye was a rabbit and pheasant hanging on the roof. There was also a huge fur sheet of some unknown animal on the wall. However, at this moment, Snowfry sensed that there was someone else in the room. He did not know who it was, and a trace of nervousness came over him. Chapter 246. Sure enough, there were 2 more people in the room, but they were not allies. It was strange where the Imperial people in the fortress had gone. It seemed that another battle was inevitable. Snowfry gave Hadeva a look behind him, and he immediately understood what Snowfry meant. The 2 of them sneaked behind the stone pillar and attacked the 2 storm-cloaked soldiers at the same time. Just like before, there was no doubt that these 2 people were too weak. Haha! It reminded Snowfry of Journey to the West TV series he had seen before. The classic line of Sun Wukong. Only then did Snowfry have time to look around the room. There was a small dining table in the room. There was also a large dining table with some cutlery on it. This room seemed to be a dining room for the Imperial people, and there was a lot of food in it. There was bread, mana potions, and salt piles, as well as iron pots, wooden bowls, wooden spoons, tankards, and other cutlery on the dining table. There were also mana potions and wine on the kitchen rack next to the dining table, and 2 pieces of charcoal were found in the bottom drawer. There was also a beer barrel on the dining table, and there was another beer barrel under the 3 kitchen racks on the side. There were also candles on a horn base on the dining table, and Snowfry unceremoniously put all the supplies into his spatial ring in front of Hadeva. Of course, this included the bodies of the 2 storm-cloaked soldiers on the ground. Then Snowfry began to search a place where goods were stored, and there were many barrels and bags there. He found mana potions, green apples, tomatoes, salt piles, mana potions, cabbages, and rabbit legs. There was also a green bird egg, and Hadeva told Snowfry that it was the egg of the stone-perched nightingale, a wild bird. There was so much food, and Snowfry was very happy. After eating some bread, he put it all into his spatial ring. Did you think Snowfry was called the Otherworld Raider for nothing? Wherever he went, not even a blade of grass was left. After leaving here, we went down the stairs to the interrogation room. The first thing that came into view was a hanging skeleton and 3 vertical rectangular iron cages. There was a battle going on in the interrogation room, and 2 storm-cloaked soldiers were lying dead on the ground. In the interrogation room, there were 2 torturers. They swung their hammers and swords to kill the 2 storm-cloaked soldiers. They were very happy to meet them, and Snowfree and Hadeva told the 2 perverted torturers what had happened up there. They thought for a moment, and said that it was no wonder they seemed to have heard some strange sounds from above. At this time, Snowfry was not idle either. He collected all the items on the corpses of the soldiers. He also saw a book called the Book of Dragonkin, a dagger, and a backpack on a small table next to the stone pillar in the middle. There was a lockpick in a knapsack, and now Snowfry took it. While everyone was talking, he tried to open the door of the middle of the 3 upright iron cuboids. The 2 corpses beside him were empty. Only the one in the middle had the corpse of an apprentice magician. It was as if he could do it all of a sudden. Snowfry guessed that it might have something to do with the body of the Tiger Man. It took him a little time to open the door of the iron cage. There were quite a lot of things inside. There were mana-weakening potions, some gold coins, a magic hood and a magic robe, and a magic book for lightning spells. These were all good things, and Snowflake was overjoyed. After taking them all away, Snowfry took everything from one of the cells in the interrogation room. There was an iron shield, a heavy iron hammer, and a book called A Brief History of the Empire too. No matter what, as long as it could fit, Snowfry would take it all away. Then Hadeva asked Snowfry if they could go. He knew too well how much the Tiger Man liked to loot, but it didn't matter. Snowfry said it was ready, and everyone went deeper into the room. Then they saw another room. There were 3 cages and a charcoal basin, and some dining tables. Then there was a skeleton and a skeleton that hadn't become a skeleton. Snowfry got some gold coins and bone dust from the skeleton. He didn't even let the skeleton go. An assistant torturer with a hammer came with us. We left the room and came to a very open place. There were 3 storm-cloaked soldiers in there. I don't know where they came from. They were there. There was a cave with a little stream. There was a little bridge. Got rid of the 2 soldiers. The torturer was dead. There was a lot of oil on the ground. We came to the mouth of a cave. Out. There was a lever. He pulled it down. The door became a bridge. We went over. It was a cave. As soon as we went forward, the back collapsed. And there was a dragon's cry. It got shakier and shakier. Then, it was a stream. In front of it was a cave. I remember there was a broken sewer on the left side. 93 gold coin purse. There were gold coins and red potions. Another skeleton that cost 12 gold coins. 2 big spiders and 2 small spiders. Frostbite venom. There were spiders in the eggs. Wine trailer. 37 gold coins in it. Blackthorn honey wine. A bear was knocked down by me. I took the bear's skin and bear claws. I went deeper into the cave along the stream. There were stone pillars in the cave. There was light coming in. I saw snow coming out of the gurgling stream. Wow, it was picturesque. Cedar trees, distant mountains, and the sunset. The air was good. The man said that his uncle was from Riverwood Town. I casually picked a snowberry and ate it. There were mountain flowers, red mountain flowers. There were blue flowers. There were tree fungus and thistle flowers. I saw signs on the roads. There were many foxes and hares in the mountains. I found the warrior's stone and the thief's stone. I chose the mage's stone. Coal mine. He thought I was pardoned. I took down one orc bandit after another. Then I followed the river. Going down the water, there are wolves. I killed an elk. It had antlers, deer skin, and rotten meat. This Riverwood town was truly a place with verdant hills and limpid waters. The weather was also really good. I was completely defeated. After being slapped awake, I was like when San, a modern Q, writing bullshit novels to make money. It was all nonsense. Just like that, the main character was slapped back to the modern world. Looking at the traffic outside the window, I had a lot of thoughts. That world didn't exist anymore. All the people didn't exist anymore. And the hunger in front of me was so real. This era was really a bad era. Maybe I was too pessimistic. So I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything. It was as if everything was useless. I didn't know what I could do. I didn't know what I had to do. When my faith was completely shattered, I didn't know what was left of me. I lived like a zombie. I breathed, ate, and slept. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.